Chimera lay next to the broken carriage, completely unaware of her body as the life gradually left her. In her final moments of awareness, she remembered the day when her story was already sealed. The first point that Chimera Armin went for was incredibly dazzling. However, despite the fact that the heroine was the daughter of Duke Armin, she felt intense fear. There were so many people around that she immediately took her breath away and felt dizzy. Because of this, she began to lose consciousness and falling. She suddenly found herself in the hands of a man who managed to pick her up. The hero savior turned out to be Bernard Demeter, who was the heir to the title of Marquis of Demeter and the bodyguard of the Crown Prince. The girl could not take her eyes off him, and the man noticed how red her cheeks were. Ignoring the looks around her, she thanked him for his help with a bow. At the same moment, Chimera realized that she had fallen in love with Bernard at first sight. The next morning, the heroine first of all went to her father's office. At this time, Duke Fel Armen was busy working with documents and did not even notice when his daughter came to see him. After greeting her father, Chimera was happy to announce that she had a man she would like to marry. Fel slowly turned his head towards the heroine, still mentally at work. The girl stood resolutely, but her gaze was lowered, and she was very afraid of being rejected. But when she heard that the Duke would try to do everything he could, she immediately cheered up and felt a surge of energy. Now, she was thinking that she could marry the very man she had fallen in love with at first sight. At the same time, Chimera could not even imagine that this would lead her to the grave. Soon, there was a meeting with her future fiancé, who did not want to get married, but he did not even think of falling in love with the heroine. Sitting opposite him, the girl was confused by what she heard. Perhaps at this moment it was worth giving it up, but the heroine decided not to give up. Chimera had already heard that he had a lover who did not correspond to the status of the future marquis. However, in her opinion, it was probably just a fleeting passion. The heroine was young and knew love for the first time, so she did not even understand that she could retreat. And guided by youthful maximalism, she decided to confess that she loved Bernard. A few days later, their wedding took place with a magnificent banquet where the girl felt the happiest. Of course, her nerves were also on edge, but Chimera decided that this was because she was getting married for the first time. At that moment, it seemed to her that she was the main character of this world, and she just needed to overcome her anxiety. During the solemn kiss, she was firmly convinced that she would be able to live with the hero for the rest of her life. However, on the very first night, she realized that she was just a third-rate villain of the novel, who was just an obstacle. Chimera woke up alone, in a dark room, while Bernard met the morning with his beloved, who was originally with him. But the girl again intended to fight to the end, and on the way to true love, she decided on desperate measures. After a while, she met Bernard on the stairs, wanting to have a serious talk with him. When he turned his head to her, the heroine admitted that they would have a child very soon. To her surprise, the hero's face remained the same stone even after what she heard. Chimera knew perfectly well before that he did not love her at all. However, if he is not a good husband, then let him at least become a good father, and in this case, the heroine will continue to tolerate it. She hoped that thanks to the child, they could at least become a good and loving couple of parents. But Bernard did not even move an eyebrow and, to Chimera's horror, silently turned around and continued on his way. In the end, the girl's courage did not touch his soul in any way, and she could only mentally beg him to stay. And looking at his back, she did not understand at all why he was treating her so cruelly. The heroine's health was already weak, and due to the depressed psychological state, the child could not stand it and died. And although the baby was still only in her belly, Chimera managed to love her child very much. After that, the heroine no longer wanted to see anyone and became extremely cruel and cold in communication. If she needed something, she asked for servants or a butler, but Chimera decided to quarrel with some commoner on her own. And even if this makes the heroine fall to her level, then being deprived of a husband, a child, and pride, she was ready for anything. Arriving at a small, rural house, the girl went to the front door and knocked. The door was opened by the daughter of the nanny of the Demeter family, named Reina, who was the same lover of Bernard from the very beginning. Deciding to speak directly, and in fact, Chimera was sure that it was because of this girl that her child died. In addition, according to the heroine, she was the only one to blame for the fact that her marriage with the Marquis failed. Losing control of herself, Chimera struck Reina in the face with all her strength. Trembling with fear and holding her swollen cheek with her hand, the girl was shocked that the heroine's child had died. This made Chimera even angrier and began to shout furiously at Reina, blaming her for all her troubles. She didn't understand why her child had died and the girl was still alive, which horrified Reina. The heroine swung again to strike and did not notice how a male figure appeared behind her. At the same moment, Reina almost fainted from what she saw, and everything swam in shock before her eyes. Chimera was lying on the ground and holding her face after receiving a powerful blow from Bernard. Furious with resentment and humiliation, the heroine looked furiously at the girl. Reina stared at her too, confused and horrified by what was happening. At the same moment, she suddenly turned to the hero, screaming furiously and not understanding how he dared to hit his own wife so hard. Crying with sympathy for Chimera, she continued to scream, considering Bernard's behavior unworthy. Realizing that this girl was protecting her, the heroine first came to a stupor and bewilderment. But then, while a servant was helping her up, she decided that Reina was just hypocritically deceiving them by pretending to be holy and innocent. Turning to her with a grin, Chimera wanted the girl to stop this performance immediately. She was completely convinced that it was Reina who had ruined her life the most. Besides, did she really like to be the mistress of someone else's husband? Coming close to her, the heroine, like the mother of a dead child, wondered if the girl was happy to have fun with his father. How horrible Reina was that, with her angelic appearance, she acted as if she didn't know what she was doing. Thinking that she was evil itself, the indignant Chimera returned to the carriage and went home. On the way, she thought about the fact that in the end, the marriage she dreamed of turned out to be unrealistic. Also, apparently she wasn't the main character at all, but rather a determined and greedy villainess who got in the way of everyone else. After a while, she went on a trip, but there was an accident and the heroine, lying on the cold ground, looked at the sky and remembered her life. Now she knew only two things, and the first was what a pathetic ending was prepared for the villain of the story. The second thing Chimera realized right before her death was that she herself was to blame for all the events that had happened. But suddenly, the heroine opened her eyes and found herself in a time when she had not yet married. After recovering a little from the shock, she decided that this was her chance to change everything. And after she had paid too high a price for everything, there was something that needed to be done first. After changing her clothes, she went back to her father's office, this time feeling much more confident. Chimera could no longer live like this and decided that now she would not stand still. Entering her father's office, she decided to break off her marriage with her husband from the threshold. Fel was so taken aback by these unexpected words that he immediately jumped up from his seat. First of all, he was shocked that the heroine had already called Bernard her husband, although the wedding had not yet taken place. Realizing what stupidity she had blurted out, Chimera immediately began to frantically think about how to get out of it. In a past life, sometime after talking to Reina, the girl came to the heroine to apologize. From her words, she just loved Bernard and wanted to be with him, but she never expected that their child could die because of this. Reina was sure that if she saw the hero just a little, then nothing terrible would happen. Crying into Bernard's shoulder, she did not want to hurt him and his wife. Believing that she didn't know anything, Reina decided that it was all due to her own greed, which meant that she was the only one to blame. Therefore, quickly walking away, she wanted to leave the hero and hoped that she would not hate her. But suddenly, Bernard abruptly followed her, taking Reina's hand as he walked and stopping her. The hero did not understand what she was talking about, because, in his opinion, Reina was innocent, and the only culprit was himself. Therefore, first of all, Bernard wanted the girl to stop blaming herself as soon as possible. Other than that, he also didn't want to hear such terrible things from her anymore. Taking Reina in his arms, the Marquis coldly looked at Chimera, sending her into a stupor. The heroine was shocked that the father of her deceased child dared to look at her in such a way. Thinking that he had never looked at her like this before, Chimera suddenly heard Bernard begin to console Reina again. The heroine did not understand how he could do this in this situation, being the father of their child. After all, the heroine firmly believed that it was this girl who was to blame for the death of their child. Suddenly turning to Chimera, Reina apologized again, deciding that she loved the man very much and couldn't leave. Hearing these words, the heroine felt as if the scales were falling from her eyes and a dark emptiness formed inside. These words meant that everything around was not a dream, but nothing more than the nightmarish truth of life. And now, Duke Armin did not understand the inconstancy of his daughter, who until recently was burning to marry herself. Chimera knew that Bernard did not marry her for love, but because he wanted to protect his love for Reina. Before the girl came to her with an apology, she diligently denied all this. Chimera just thought that if Reina disappeared, everything would return to normal. However, the girl was not just a mistress, but a real lover, while the heroine was just a wife. Therefore now, despite her father's words, she was ready for anything, just not to conclude this marriage. Fell thought that perhaps the groom had done something immature, which was not uncommon, and his adult daughter should turn a blind eye to it. Chimera knew that since she was the first to talk about marriage, it would not be easy to cancel it. But on the other hand, she was sick and tired of hearing this from childhood, what she should and should not do. But having decided not to live it anymore, she wanted to break off the marriage, since the hero was not going to part with his beloved Reina anyway. Kneeling down, she no longer wanted to live in this hell and began to beg the Duke to get her out of there. Bowing her head to him, the heroine in return was ready to do everything that her father would not ask for. Confused by her behavior, Fell immediately ran up to her, wanting his daughter to get up from the floor. But her intentions were serious, and unable to change Bernard's mind, Chimera wanted to break off the engagement with him. This time, the heroine saw the shock on her father's face for the first time. She has never been a problematic daughter, and has always solved her problems herself. Returning to the table and sighing tiredly, Fell decided that he needed to think a little before making such a decision. This was a matter for the whole family, so there was no hurry, but for now, the Duke wanted Chimera back to her room. For her, this was already enough, because she didn't even think that the Duke would consider this matter. Returning to her room, she began to peacefully embroider a handkerchief, thinking about everything. Suddenly, her mother came into her room, wanting to talk a little with the heroine. According to the woman, there was no such thing as a happy marriage in the world, and if she wanted it herself, then why ask for a breakup like this? In addition, the mother believed that some commoner mistress was not the reason for this at all. Unlike her, Chimera believed with hope that not all marriages were hell. And not wanting to be unhappy, she would prefer an ideal marriage for mutual love. The heroine knew that her mother would probably consider it stupid, but she wanted to be stupid for her at least once. At the same time, Chimera didn't know whether she should get on her knees or start crying like crazy. Alternatively, you could also fall into madness and grab your mother by the sleeve and start begging her. Seeing that the woman was just silently staring at her, Chimera hesitantly stretched out her hand to her. But her mother coldly beat her aside, still looking at her daughter with the same disdain. After that, without saying a word, she turned around and began to calmly leave the room. The heroine was surprised that her mother just left. Falling to the floor, she was most afraid that she would have to go through this hell again. Chimera did not want to feel the loss of her precious child again. Nor did she want to see again the beautiful house in which they lived, which did not correspond to her worthless condition. As she pondered bitterly, she suddenly heard the familiar but almost forgotten voice of her servant. Rizdel went into her room, breathing as if she had run here, and looked at her mistress intently. Falling at her feet, the maid began to beg for forgiveness, blaming everything on her tongue, which was completely boneless. She was so engrossed in the rumors that she didn't even notice how Lady Armin's body weakened. Besides, Rizdel never thought that her words could lead to such a terrible turn of events. Chimera remembered that it was this caring maid who had first informed her of Reina's existence. However, in her past life, the heroine did not care at all what they thought of her. Therefore, when she heard the news from Rizdel about the hero's beloved, she immediately became furious and threw this poor child out. But then, when Chimera herself became ill, she finally realized that the pain of other people was similar to hers. Poor Rizdel, having lost her job due to the anxiety of the landlady, who did not even write a letter of recommendation, could not find a new job. By and large, she only told the truth, and the heroine kicked her out because she was unpleasant to hear it. So now, she hugged the maid tightly, confusing her. Chimera decided that she had been too cruel to her maid all along. She knew that the girl had told the news because she was worried about her mistress, who was acting too immature and petty. After these words, Rizdel looked at her mistress with tears, and Chimera wanted her to stop crying. After all, other people may think that it is the heroine who is to blame for her tears. The maid was completely convinced that she had committed a mortal sin because she had ruined their marriage. But Chimera decided that it was not her fault, because she only revealed the truth to her. Now, Lady Armin suddenly realized that it would be much worse if she didn't know about anything. After Rizdel left, the heroine remembered the saying that the more it hurts you, the older you become. Nevertheless, she believed that such pain was too much, after which she again began to sew a handkerchief. Despite everything, she had the feeling that she had woken up after a long nightmare and had a chance to change something. After a while, she was sitting on the sofa at a small table, enjoying wonderful tea and waiting for Bernard. Before that, her father set a condition for her to meet with the hero again and then make a final decision. The Duke also believed that perhaps they would be able to solve the problem after talking. And now, Chimera thought that if she could just break off the marriage after a couple of conversations, then why was she mired in the darkness of the past? She decided to tell Bernard everything that she had been planning to do for a long time, but could never squeeze out of herself. But the hero appeared very unexpectedly, from which the heroine shuddered and spilled some tea on her dress. Looking at her sternly, Bernard wanted to clarify if Chimera was okay. Seeing a small stain on her dress, he delicately handed the handkerchief to the girl. The heroine was glad that her heart no longer fluttered next to him, and her feelings for him must have cooled down completely. Therefore, looking at him calmly, Chimera decided that she was perfectly fine, after which she took out her napkin. Now that she didn't love him, she didn't need to hate that woman anymore. Feeling the long-awaited freedom, she decided to just talk to him for a while. Suddenly, the hero decided that he did not like it at all when Lady Armin confessed her love to him, but she continued to do so. Bernard himself was well aware that he was not the person who could make her happy. At that moment, everything instantly returned to normal, and the heroine was lost for a second. The hero's eyes tore her heart to shreds, and his tongue grew sharper with every word. Chimera remembered the time when she expressed her opinion to the face of his beloved, after which Bernard raised his hand against her. Then the heroine fell at his feet and clung to the hero, begging him not to do this to her. But now she was calm and knew perfectly well why he didn't want to marry her. With his arms folded over his chest, Bernard did not understand what exactly she meant by this. In response, Chimera silently looked at him, showing disdain and hoping that he would confess himself. The hero was confused when he saw her look at him for the first time. Tired of his silence, Chimera confessed that she knew about his relationship with Reina. However, she did not understand why the hero did not immediately admit this as soon as he was offered marriage. Why didn't he immediately clarify to his fiancée that he could not make her happy, because this should have been said in the first place? But Bernard was in a stupor, not understanding how she knew the name of his beloved. Chimera also knew that he had decided to marry her to protect Reina, but that was still not a good reason for doing so. And what was the fault of the woman who agreed to marry him? In response, Bernard decided that since she was the first to talk about marriage, it was the heroine who was now behaving incorrectly. But this was not the case, and when he learned that she had already demanded that her parents break off the engagement, the hero was completely taken aback. Her preparation for marriage was already over, because Chimera did not need a husband who would not love her. The reason why the heroine initially wanted to marry him was that she naively believed that he would become a good husband and father. But now Chimera realized that Bernard could never become such a person. The hero decided that she says this because of a thirst for something that does not belong to her. But this was not so, and the heroine noted with a smile that he could not become a good husband and father for his beloved. Thinking that she was showing jealousy in this way, Bernard even laughed. But even here he did not guess, because the hero was just a coward who did not have the courage to go against his parents and be together with Reina. All he could do was hide his beloved and secretly meet with her, being married to someone else. Of course, the heroine hated this woman, but most of all she hated this abnormal. After all, Bernard was not going to give up either his wife, who lived up to the expectations of his parents, or his love. This made them both unhappy, so Chimera believed that he could not be a suitable husband for Reina either. Hearing these words, the hero was overwhelmed with indignation, but he could not say anything in spite of it. After all, he really could not resist his family and parents, whom he was afraid of, and throw away all questions just to love. In addition, Bernard did not even feel guilty for not being able to love his wife, whom he married because of his parents' approval. Therefore, Chimera strongly believed him to be a coward and a pathetic person who made her and Rihanna unhappy. Being in confusion, the hero sat silently and burned the table with his gaze. Realizing that he even had nothing to justify himself with, the heroine decided to end the conversation and leave. At this moment, Bernard looked at her helplessly, shocked by himself and what was happening. Giving him a cold look for the last time, Chimera turned around and began to leave, leaving the hero in complete confusion. A little later, Bernard went to fencing training, sparring with his friend. Previously a deadly and merciless hero, now he could only fight off the enemy with difficulty. His comrade and future Marquis, Jed Rachnan, did not understand why Bernard looked so helpless. Knowing that he was in disarray after talking to his fiancée, Jed believed that the heroine was not ordinary. After all, because of her, the hero became extremely inattentive, and his friend calmly carried out his attacks, each time pushing him aside. In addition, it was clear from the shaking hands that Bernard was holding the sword rather weakly. Because of this, Jed parried his attacks with unprecedented ease and counterattacked. Noticing that he was using some strange fighting techniques, Bernard became alert and jumped to the side. First of all, the hero decided to push his opponent away, and then deliver a decisive blow. As Jed approached, the hero swung his sword sharply, hoping to push his opponent aside. But suddenly the opponent passed right under the blade of his sword, rushing at Bernard. Once nearby, he dealt a crushing blow to the body, after which the defeated hero fell to the ground. At the end of the attack, Jed placed the tip of the blade of his sword on his comrade's neck, signifying his victory. Suddenly, they heard a man's voice announcing a crushing victory for the hero. Laughing, Jed was pleased that His Highness himself had acknowledged his victory. The Crown Prince of the Empire, Max Saver, decided that in this battle, Bernard was simply distracted by his thoughts. Meanwhile, having recovered from the fall, the hero was indignant that while he was away, his comrade managed to learn a new technique. However, in Jed's own opinion, victory was the main thing and everything else did not matter. Also, while Bernard was wasting his time, he wasn't sitting back and training. Laughing, Bernard conceded defeat, deciding that he had indeed been too abdicated lately. In turn, Max found it strange that he had not seen the face of his escort lately. The prince was upset because it looked like after the hero's engagement, he had taken a back seat. Covering his face with his hand in shame, Bernard did not understand if he was really so detached. Lying down next to him, Jed thought so, and now he wondered who was this woman who was able to excite the hero. Max, on the other hand, believed that Bernard would be better off focusing on becoming a knight of a higher rank. After all, it is not very good for the reputation of the heir to the throne when his escort has the status of an ordinary knight. The hero despondently agreed, and in the meantime Jed wanted to know why the prince did not provide him with such moral support. However, to the hero's surprise, Max did not see the point in supporting him at all. After all, Jed did his job properly and did not lose his mind in sparring, which was like a knife in the back for Bernard. Laughing, the future Marquis thought that His Highness had noticed this very correctly. After that, all three laughed, and a little later, Bernard left them. Left alone, Jed learned from Max that he also considered the hero to be Iron Man, but unexpectedly, he showed weakness. Despite the fact that Bernard's love began to wield his sword, his friends believed that he would certainly cope with this problem. However, the marriage that was contracted by his family and subsequently destroyed the hero was indeed a good cause for concern. But the prince didn't worry, because Bernard was indeed made of steel, but still it was fun to watch him swing his arms. Jed was also interested in watching how, for the first time in history, the hero's hands were shaking so violently. The hero also wanted to look at this woman now, but Max hoped for his reasonableness, because for such desires, the hero can break his nose. But Jed assured him that there was nothing to worry about, because he was one of those people who were good at keeping the line. As for the prince, he liked the way Chimera behaved in this situation, because in general, she was right. Especially considering Bernard's method, which was to suppress those weaker than him for his own comfort. In addition, he was different from them, and having lost his way only once, everything would be over for him forever. The hero thought that maybe it was so, but Bernard was too stupid to notice how someone wanted to fool him. Meanwhile, the heir considered it simply unbelievable that he had not yet heard of this woman with such a strong character. What could she say to this prim Bernard that it shocked him so much? Max had already known that Treasurer Fell had a daughter, who was also on the list of contenders for the crown princess. But now the prince wanted to see her in person, because it seems that she is a really interesting person. When the preparations for the wedding were completed, a suspicious silence reigned in the mansion. Now no one was particularly busy, and because of Chimera, everything turned upside down. She was fine herself, but all the maids were thinking about how not to hurt her mistress's feelings and looked worried. Sitting in her room and considering it incredibly suspicious, the heroine suddenly heard a voice from the corridor. Other maids believed that Rizdel not only ruined her mistress's wedding, but also walked around as if nothing had happened. And the maid herself was standing at that time near the window and crying, to the cackle of other girls. They considered their mistress a real angel, and hearing this, Chimera understood what was going on. Smiling, she decided that under no circumstances should she turn a blind eye to the bullying. Therefore, on the same day, she ordered all the maids to gather in the main hall of the mansion. Not understanding anything, the girls stood in the appointed place, waiting for their mistress with trepidation. Meanwhile, Chimera appeared on the other side of the stairs, bringing with her Rizdel, who was holding a basket in her hands. The heroine looked sternly at all the maids standing below without saying a word. The girls were completely confused and looked at her with fear. One of them, noticing the mistress's gaze on her, automatically bowed to the floor. When Chimera began her speech, she did not see the need to explain why she had called them here. After these words, every single maid bowed their heads and confessed their guilt. Smiling at them, the heroine decided that although they were right, she had not come here to scold them. She felt very sorry for Rizdel, but the girl's behavior touched her heart. In addition, Chimera herself admitted that she was a strict and captious hostess. But she wanted that because of her failed marriage. The maids would not be more depressed than she was, nor would they start quarrels among themselves. She has already learned that you can't control people with a whip alone, especially when it comes to resolving a conflict. Going down to the girls and turning to Rizdel, the heroine wanted her to bring and distribute to them what was in the basket. Before that, Chimera knew that these maids were trustworthy, but she could not have imagined that they were so kind to her. But now, after learning of this, Chimera decided to reward them, but that was not the way they behaved with Rizdel. After that, she took one of the ribbons, with a large, precious stone in the basket, and tied it to the hair of one of the maids. The girl was shocked not only by the beauty of this jewelry, but also by the fact that the lady considered her worthy of wearing it. Chimera gave such a ribbon to each of the maids, as a sign of their devotion to affection for her. However, this did not justify their attitude towards Rizdel, so the heroine hoped that from now on they would be more careful in their actions. In addition, it was thanks to this young maid that the heroine was able to find out about their attitude towards her. Therefore, Chimera wanted the girls to be kinder to Rizdel and no longer allow themselves to be dismissive of her. At this moment, she pushed the maid towards them as she began to leave, smiling as she watched what was happening. The picture changed dramatically, and all the maids looked at Rizdel as if she were their best friend. The heroine remembered that she had been running Bernard's mansion for several years, during which there was a lot of trouble. Some of the servants were acting strangely, and the master of the house was constantly absent, but now there was no need to worry about that. In addition, Chimera would never be able to keep track of everything herself, take care of the household, cook and clean. But suddenly the heroine thought that hadn't she learned how to be a beloved wife? In this case, what should she have done in a situation where her husband openly cheated on her? What if the problem was really in her and the heroine is simply not worthy of love? Thinking that everything could happen again if she married again, Chimera felt her eyes fill with tears. As she approached her room, she suddenly heard a noise behind her and turned around to see Rizdel sitting on the floor. Not understanding what had suddenly come over her, the heroine wanted the maid to get up as soon as possible. Raising her head to her, crying with joy, the girl wanted to express her sincere gratitude to her mistress. At the same moment, a thought pierced Chimera's head about something she had never thought about before. After all, if you think about it, she could become the person who can make people happy with all sorts of small, good deeds. Before that, the heroine just lived, not fully realizing what her happiness was. Maybe she went back in time because she was sorry that she was so stupid. And since Chimera has the power to help different people, then perhaps for this reason God gave her a second chance. Realizing this inside herself, the heroine felt a second wind and an unprecedented thirst for life. Crouching down in front of Rizdel, she gently stroked her head, knowing that she was a good maid who was not to blame for anything. If there were any flaws in the girl, they were the flaws of Chimera herself, as her mistress. Therefore, the heroine did not want her to feel pressured about this, because it was just a small act of kindness on her part. After these words, Chimera hugged the maid tightly, glowing with happiness inside and out, and also wishing that Rizdel would also be happy. Later, she sat in her room, filled with an atmosphere of serenity, and continued to embroider a handkerchief. Looking out the window, Chimera saw the girl who used to mock Rizdel, and now was talking to her nicely on the sidelines. Enjoying watching this, the heroine hoped that now everything else would also take its course. Perhaps she will really be able to find a different path, but for this, she needs to leave the past in the past. Soon, when Bernard learned that Reina's house had been attacked, he was horrified. Wanting to get to her as quickly as possible, he rushed to the door, but suddenly Prince Max appeared and stopped him. Putting his hand on his shoulder, the heir decided that the hero should first calm down. In addition, His Highness wanted to lend him his carriage so that he could get to his beloved's house even faster. Taken aback by these words, Bernard immediately drooped, deciding that he had no right to use the imperial carriage like this. Then the prince decided to go with him too, bringing the hero into complete confusion. Jed, who arrived at that moment, thought that although His Highness's actions were indeed hasty, they should not be ignored. In addition, in his opinion, it will be safer if Bernard finally introduces them to his beloved. After a little thought and realizing that there was simply no other way out now, the hero agreed to their proposal. All the way, Jed sat by the window, and although it seemed to him that there was nothing wrong with it, it still aroused his interest. It was extremely amusing that Bernard, who was so prim and proper, was suddenly subjected to discussion. The hero was extremely surprised that his comrade was so mad that it was even reflected in his sword-wielding. Jed remembered that it was not difficult to inform Bernard's family about Reina's whereabouts and why the hero was absent. He framed his friend so much because this marriage benefits not only Bernard personally, but also supporters of the Crown Prince's faction. Therefore, if something goes wrong, it will hurt everyone, so he provoked the attack on Reina. In addition, Jed was curious to see how the hero himself would react to this situation. In his opinion, this chump will not be particularly concerned about what happened. But judging by Bernard's face and behavior, he was mistaken, and very wrong. Arriving at the scene, they found a real pogrom inside and outside the house of the girl's family. Jed was glad that thanks to this fool's emotions, he had not been able to find this home. Bernard immediately ran inside the building, desperately calling for Reina and turning his head in all directions. Everything was turned upside down, as if a hurricane had swept through the house, and there was not a soul anywhere. Suddenly, he saw his assistant, who carefully led the girl out of the secret room. Noticing her lover, Reina immediately threw herself into his arms, with tears of joy in her eyes. The assistant, in turn, apologized to his master for being inattentive and unable to protect his mistress properly. Reina hastened to calm the hero because she was fine, only slightly dislocated her leg when she ran away. Hearing this, Bernard sighed doomedly, holding her even tighter to him. Entering the house at that moment, the prince and the marquis were shocked by the mess that was going on here. Bernard's subordinate fell into a stupor when he saw the crown prince behind him. He also noticed that the girl suddenly shifted her gaze to those who entered. Bowing to them in greeting, the assistant reported to the master that the attack had been carried out by a large group of people. However, the strange thing was that the bandits were interested in the mistress and did not pay attention to the property of the house. Therefore, after thinking about everything, he decided that for the sake of the master, it would be better to protect the girl than to find out who was behind it. He knew it might have been the wrong decision, but Bernard patted him on the shoulder, thinking it was a very good decision. After all, it is not known what could have happened if he had not hidden Reina in a secret passage. The subordinate protected her for him, so the hero felt the deepest gratitude to him. Meanwhile, Jed stood aside and listened attentively to their touching dialogue. He knew that Bernard was personally involved in the training of this soldier, so he was glad that he did not attack on his own. And since when did the hero turn into a digger who digs secret passages? Or is he the kind of person whose intelligence increases dramatically when it comes to protecting people? Although, most likely, Reina was just so important to him that he began to go crazy. In Jed's opinion, it would be better if the girl disappeared once and for all, because then he would not need to bother with it every time. Looking at Bernard embracing this lady, he could not stand it anymore and walked towards them. After all, is Bernard really going to continue to hug her without even introducing his friends? It seems that when they saw his beloved, his friends immediately faded into the background, which greatly embarrassed the hero. Suddenly, Reina turned her attention back to the guests, greeting Bernard's friends. The girl knew it would sound strange under the circumstances, but she was glad that she had the opportunity to meet them. Looking at her better, Jed was stunned by Reina's beauty, and at that moment, he and Bernard turned their gaze to the prince. Smiling sweetly, he also expressed his joy at meeting the girl, while glowing like an angel. Seeing him, Reina also suddenly beamed, looking at His Highness in admiration. But immediately realizing that guests had come to her, she turned around abruptly and went to make tea. Looking at her, the heroes decided that she did not have to do it at all. However, Reina did not want to hear anything, inviting them to the table and continuing cooking. Sitting down in their seats, the friends looked at each other silently for a while. The tense silence was dispelled by Max, who suddenly decided that Bernard had chosen a really interesting woman. Smiling at the top of his mouth, the prince thought she was truly amazing. At the same moment, suddenly becoming serious, he thought that if nothing was done, then they might not be able to see her again. The hero also thought she was special, and Jed decided that she didn't have to make them tea with an injured ankle. Bernard decided that since it was the first time he had brought his friends here, she just decided to be a little stubborn. In any case, it was important for the prince that she did not find out about his title, because useless information could be harmful. And besides, he reminded him again that it was impossible to allow anything to happen to Reina. According to Max, this mansion built by Bernard was quite beautiful but unfortunately destroyed. Jed also understood that now his beloved would not be able to stay here, and he wondered what the hero planned to do. Smiling, the Marquis was even ready to lend her his villa, since he also liked this girl very much. Deciding to stop this idle talk, the prince wondered if Bernard had any suspicions about who could have done all this. If someone found out about this place, then there was a high probability that it was someone close to the hero. Bernard assumed that this man must have hated him as well. Thinking about it, Max decided that it could be because of more than just hatred for him. This could have been done by parents or a close friend, due to excessive concern for the hero. Looking away, Jed decided that if there was such a person, Bernard would certainly not trust him. Suddenly, after listening to the words of his comrades, one thought suddenly occurred to the hero, after which his face sharply darkened and his fists clenched tightly. He wanted to leave immediately, and having received the prince's approval, he rushed from his place to the exit. Looking after him, Max thought that this guy could do a lot of things, which amused Jed. The Marquis knew perfectly well that His Highness hated such incompetence. Therefore, he did not understand why the prince would engage in such nonsense, because he could replace the hero with someone more promising. Meanwhile, Reina was already hurrying towards them, carrying a tray of tea and sweets in her hands. She apologized for the delay, which was caused by a mess in the kitchen. Suddenly, the prince got up from the table and decided that since the master had left, he would not cause trouble and would also go. Surprised by the unexpected decision, Jed did not know whether he should follow His Highness. However, Max decided that he should take Bernard's lover to safety. The main thing is that this place is really safe, and if something happens, the prince will not forgive him. After a while, Camira sat quietly in her room and stared intently at the cup of tea. It was very difficult for her to force herself not to be immersed in thoughts of the past, which no longer existed. Suddenly, she heard a knock on the door, which surprised her and invited the guest to enter. It turned out to be Rizdal, who brought her mistress good news. According to the maid, he looked quite serious and perhaps wanted to say something important to the mistress, and certainly a good one. Shocked by the news, the heroine did not understand why he came again. Seeing that the mistress's face had become gloomy and serious, Rizdal was extremely worried. Abruptly getting up from her seat, Camira ordered to escort the guest to the living room, without any noise. She was confused by his unannounced visit, as if he had done nothing wrong. It will be very implausible if the heroine breaks off the engagement, showing her excessive hatred. Deciding not to show it to anyone, she looked in the mirror, hiding all her anger behind a mask of calm. Tuning into the meeting, Camira was determined to make sure that no one knew about what was going on in her head. When she left the room, all the maids immediately surrounded her, praising their mistress and offering her tea. The heroine thought that reconciling the maids was a good idea, but they loved her too much. And because Mom was watching, she couldn't afford to scold them for it. And in general, these girls gave her great support, so Chimera smiled at them in a friendly way. As she opened the door to the living room, she hoped that Bernard had come to end their story once and for all. Starting to open the door, she immediately decided to find out what exactly brought the hero here. But he was right outside the door, and as soon as she took a step, she immediately received a strong blow in the face. Immediately afterward, he began to insult her, accusing her of attempting to assassinate Reina, causing her to be confused. She immediately remembered the day in the past when the hero hit her in the same way. Bernard, meanwhile, continued to scream heartbreakingly, furious at the behavior of this lady. He repeated Reina's name over and over again, which was already echoing in Chimera's head, causing her pain. The heroine realized that it was normal for them to have a relationship when the husband was angry with his wife because of his mistress, and she only became angrier because of this. It turns out that on that day, he also hit her because of Reina, and even now, nothing has changed. However, whatever it was, only Chimera changed, who no longer wanted to give up. Demanding an explanation from her, Bernard swung again, intending to deliver another blow. But at the same moment, the heroine struck him in the face with her fist with such force that the hero almost fell off his feet. She didn't understand who he was and how he dared to mock her like that. Not expecting such a turn, Bernard froze in place, completely bewildered. Chimera decided that there was some kind of misunderstanding, and she just returned what she got to him. She doubted that the hero was now able to conduct a normal dialogue, so she wanted him to return to himself. After these words, she calmly left the living room, leaving the dumbfounded Bernard alone. Going out into the corridor, she felt severe nausea, everything tightened in her chest, and there was a veil in front of her eyes. No matter how hard the heroine tried to hide her hatred, she flew into a rage every time she saw this man. She did not understand how he could behave so recklessly, and who had given him such a right. As she was walking down the hallway, she suddenly saw Bernard standing in the window, talking to someone, right on the doorstep of their house. At this moment, the heroine had the thought of letting the hero kill her. After all, if she dies by his hand, then her parents will take revenge on him in any way, ruining Bernarda's whole life. Suddenly, she noticed that the hero and his interlocutor abruptly raised their heads and looked in her direction. Completely unwilling to meet his eyes, she hurriedly jumped away from the window. At this moment, Chimera began to lose her balance, and as she fell, she saw only a maid who was desperately rushing to her aid. Running up, the maid Hannah took a closer look at her and was horrified. She didn't understand what was wrong with the mistress's hair, and why was there such a big bruise on her face. Trembling with fear, there was complete confusion in the girl's eyes, and the heroine took her hands. Looking at Hannah's crying, she immediately came to her senses, returning to reality. Chimera understood that she was here, in the present tense and at home. Hugging Hannah, she also realized that in this place she plays the role of a mother who, with her hugs, gives security. Nevertheless, the hand with which the heroine hit the hero hurt a lot, especially when moving. She remembered that during the blow, she even walked over his face with her elbow. Remembering this moment, the heroine began to let out terrible laughter, which left the maid in a stupor. Chimera remembered in detail not only the moment of her blow, but also the shocked face of this impudent man. She used all her strength and even broke his lip, which brought her a lot of pleasure. The heroine wanted to hit Bernard for a very long time, and unexpectedly, her dream came true. Hannah did not understand why the mistress was so happy, and the heroine decided that it was necessary to urgently call a doctor to her. Besides, Chimera didn't want the maid to look at her so frightened, as if she had gone mad. She just laughed at the stupid face of the hero, who received an unexpected blow from her. Did this funny hero really think that he would not receive a return for his audacity? After a short time, the doctor began to treat the wounds, which turned out to be a very unpleasant procedure. Seeing that the mistress's bone was swollen twice, the doctor strongly forbade her to wave her arms in the future. Personally, he felt that instead of beating someone and crippling himself at the same time, it was better to call the servants to do it next time. Smiling at him, the heroine wanted Dr. Benon to be more careful, because she was already in quite pain. Having expressed his opinion, the doctor calmly exhaled, peacefully closing his eyes. But after a second, he went berserk, about to remove the scalpel from this bastard's head. Looking at him, Chimera remembered that the only time Benon was so angry was when his father passed out due to drinking. Although even that time he was not so angry, but in ordinary life, the doctor was completely different. He decided that the mistress probably didn't hurt anymore since she laughed so lightheartedly. However, she was just pleased that for the first time in a long time, everyone was so worried about her. But Benon did not consider it a simple concern, because the maids wept bitterly because of what had happened to their mistress. And the owner of the mansion had a fever from this news. In addition, the butler barely managed to stop Madame at the moment when she got into the carriage to go to the house of the Demeter family. Chimera was stunned, not expecting that an ordinary slap would become such a grandiose event for everyone. It seems that her standards have changed during this time, because in the past, Bernard was so cruel to her that a slap in the face was not unusual. Later, the Duke himself came to her in tears, deciding that the wedding was now over, and he was even ready to let her live on her own. The heroine could not believe what she heard, because her father has always been a strict person who does everything for the benefit of the family. However, now, he was shocked by this guy who dared to hit his precious daughter. Meanwhile, Chimera didn't remember if she could rely on anyone in this house before. Looking at the girl seriously, Fell apologized for not believing her in the first place. And the heroine at that moment realized that even then she could refuse everything, she just did not know about it. Burning with rage, my father decided that he would certainly make this scoundrel from Demeter's family pay for everything. At the thought that this scoundrel would dare to raise a hand against his daughter, Fell was ready to tear him apart with his bare hands. Laughing, Chimera thought that no one thought it was important that she hit him too. In addition, she decided that the hero did not have to apologize, and his father did not need to punish him. In return, it was better to demand compensation for damages, as well as to blame Bernard for the breakup of the engagement and the costs of the wedding. According to the heroine, this was a very good reward in this situation, and she hoped that her father would carefully count every penny to this man. Chimera wanted to see him on his knees, begging for mercy, and believed that the hero would not be able to avoid it. Let him kneel in this house and pay whatever he owes. After all, what is the use of Bernard shining his shameless face again and apologizing once again? The Duke listened to his daughter in silence, while keeping his eyes on her. After that, he burned with a desire to destroy Demeter's family and make Bernard regret today. Therefore, he wanted his daughter to rest properly and hoped that she would not have nightmares. After her father left, Chimera decided that the hero's apology was the most meaningless thing in the world. Although she hadn't been prepared for such a turn of events, but now it was necessary to damage the Demeter family and reduce their situation. For Bernard himself, this will not be a great loss, but it will cause significant damage to the reputation of his family. The plan was to focus the attention of Demeter's family on his main weakness, rain. Chimera was still in the dark, and even though she didn't like the hero now, she still hated him. Whatever she does now, the name of this person always pops up in front of her and she feels attached like a dog. And although it was nice to slap him in the face, the heroine even regretted it a little, because with such a hand, she would not even be able to embroider now. Hearing another knock on the door, she immediately invited the guest to come in. Timidly squeezing through the half-open door, Rizdel wanted to know how her mistress was feeling. But when she saw Chimera's bandaged hand, she immediately turned pale with horror. After that, she suddenly fell on her face to the floor, confusing the heroine. As it turned out, the maid felt guilty of allowing this psycho to be alone with his mistress. Looking at her in surprise, Chimera didn't understand if this maid had always been so loyal. In addition, she decided to clarify if all the other servants were in the same shock. At the same moment, Rizdel jumped up, turning red with anger and deciding that everyone was not just in shock, but also cursing this psycho. And if the maid had the chance, she would have personally punched this guy in his pompous face, and the others were of the same opinion. In addition, Hannah dated a servant of the House of Demeter, but because of this situation, they quarreled and broke up. And it all started with the fact that this bastard took the side of his master, trying to justify him. After Hannah left him, the guy began to cry and ask for forgiveness, admitting the guilt of his master. But the girl did not forgive him later, imitating him in front of the maids. She managed to make a perfect parody, and all the girls tossed and turned on their beds with laughter. Chimera didn't even know that Hannah had such a talent, and she felt a little sorry for the guy she broke up with. However, she also could not hold back her laughter from what she heard, which made Rizdel very happy. In addition, there was another point that the maid was eager to tell her mistress. In general, servants were forbidden to whisper in the corridor in the process of cleaning. But as soon as the opportunity arose, everyone gathered and began to call this idiot names. Usually, in such situations, the butler or head maid was obliged to intervene. But when they find out that the girls are just angry with that idiot, they pretend that they did not notice anything. Shocked by what she heard, the heroine doubted that it was possible for a maid to tell such a thing to a mistress. However, Rizdal's thoughtlessness did not harm her, and Chimera decided to just turn a blind eye to it. In addition, the heroine was going to keep this maid close to her and take care of her until she got married. This is the least she could do for Rizdal as compensation for her past life. After a while, after the maid left, Chimera suddenly heard her mother's voice from behind the door. The girl fell into a stupor, not understanding what her mother had forgotten here at such a late hour. Having received permission to enter, the woman slowly entered the room, calmly looking at her daughter. Seeing that she came in pajamas, the heroine was very much puzzled. In addition, the mother usually does not come to someone's bedroom at night, except for her own. Approaching the girl's bed, the woman wondered if she wanted to go recuperate. Chimera knew that her mother often went to the local hot spring to recuperate, but she never suggested that to anyone. Perhaps the woman visited the spring to get rid of all the turmoil, because she was one of those who do not like noise. But it was not so bad, because the heroine also does not like when she is visited because of illness, and they start talking about anything. Therefore, she gladly accepted her mother's invitation, deciding to go there until everything settled down. However, she wondered what kind of source they would choose, and her mother suggested Alvid's mines, considering it a good place. As far as Chimera remembered, her mother had always been a cold-blooded, strict, and very reserved person. The girl had never seen this woman like at least once, at least someone. She had several maids who worked with her for a long time, not because she liked them, but because they didn't annoy her. And now, it was the first time that a mother decided to do something with her daughter. Previously, Chimera thought that her mother considered her worse than others, and over time accepted this as a fact, ceasing even to be offended. A woman has always been like this, and the heroine could not do anything, so she just gave up. However, recently her relatives surprised her more and more. Because of this, the heroine was uncomfortable, and she was afraid that she would be punished if she became too happy. Hearing that her daughter had accepted her invitation, the woman froze for some opinion, not taking her eyes off her. Since childhood, the girl was mature and her mother was quite satisfied with this. It seems that she did not think about it before, because initially, Chimera was not such a child. It seems that having met such a mother, she simply had no choice but to behave in this way. The woman only wanted to raise a responsible and independent child, but in the end she overdid it. And now her heart hurts every time she thinks about it. At this moment it seemed to the heroine that she had always behaved stupidly with her mother, and tears flowed from her eyes. It turns out that all this time Mom just tried too hard, but it was for her. The woman was very sorry that she could not become a good mother for her daughter, and she wasn't sure if Chimera would ever be able to forgive her for it. In addition, her mother wanted to know if the heroine would allow her to continue to be her mother. Hugging her, the heroine finally realized that all this time she was not alone, and she was sorry that she did not understand this earlier. They made her laugh and cry over and over again, covering the girl with emotions like a wave. Clinging to her mother, she decided that she had always loved her and still loved her now. Crying from these words, the woman also always loved and loves her daughter. Meanwhile, the crown prince sat at the desk in his office and worked with documents. However, he still could not get this terrible day out of his mind, which brought him to a stupor. Max still couldn't forgive himself for arriving too late that time. When he got out of the carriage, Bernard was already heading towards him with an absolutely imperturbable look. Usually, either fools or womanizers act quickly, but how did the hero manage to get into trouble if the prince almost immediately followed him in a carriage? Could it be that the brains and muscles of this man could not establish a connection with each other? Suddenly, the prince saw a girl in the window of the Armin mansion who was staring in their direction. Noticing his gaze, she immediately began to leave, but Max managed to see a huge bruise on her cheek. From what he saw, the prince was taken aback and could not believe what had happened. She was a woman with silver hair, and only one candidate from the Armin family was suitable. And the bruise on her cheek could only have been left by one person, after which Max went berserk and stared at Bernard furiously. He didn't understand how the knight dared to punch Miss in the face. After all, did he train for this every day? Hearing such words and seeing the prince so furious for the first time, the hero felt a shiver run through his entire body. Max immediately ordered him to return to the mansion and sit there, and the prince himself would refrain from punishment until he had assessed the situation. At this moment, Max himself did not understand why he felt so uncomfortable. First of all, there was no need to give in to emotions, because he did not know the whole situation. For Bernard, the appropriate punishment would have been to suspend the Imperial Knight from office for several months. And now, sitting in his office, he remembered that the daughter of the head of the family, Armin, is called Chimera. The heir doubted whether he should visit this family and console the heroine, but still he refused this idea. After all, it was a relationship between a man and a woman, and besides, Bernard was involved, so it was better not to get involved. In the grand scheme of things, it wasn't his business, and Max didn't understand why he was so worried about it. Meanwhile, the hero stood in his father's study, folding his hands behind his back and taking a hail of furious blows. Duke Demeter was furious at the trick of his son, who had no idea how much money his family would now have to spend. Bernard himself thought he could do it to protect Reina's smile. In addition, it seemed to him that he could overcome any trials for the sake of this. However, now not daring to raise his head at his father, he felt only a terrible, icy fear. After finishing the physical punishment, the Duke demanded that his son straighten up immediately. Bernard completely disappointed him, because he did not bring up the hero in the same way. Looking at him furiously, his father didn't understand how this idiot dared to hit miss. In shock from what was happening, the hero, numb with horror and shame, could only ask for forgiveness. By continuing to endure beatings from his father, Bernard could have easily survived this pain. However, the most painful thing for him was the Duke's cold gaze, filled with a mixture of disappointment and contempt. His father felt that he should apologize not to him, but to Lady Chimera, whom he had hit. And despite the feeling of guilt that seized him, the hero could not even bring himself to apologize to the one who attacked Reina. Looking at the hero in disappointment, the Duke was very tired of this idiot. Also, he was ashamed that he could not raise his own son normally. He still remembered how, furiously angry with his offspring, he had to beg the treasurer again and again. Duke Demeter wanted to settle everything by having his son apologize to the lady, but Fell insisted that Bernard be forbidden to even come close to their mansion and that they be compensated. At this moment, the Duke had no choice but to accept it and did not dare to raise his eyes to the treasurer. And now, the title of Demeter's heir would be transferred to his nephew, and no men, not even relatives, were allowed into Armin's mansion. And now, standing in front of his son, the Duke wondered if he knew why Fell had done this. But Bernard made no reply, looking away in fright. Father began to scream again, shocked that this idiot was not going to do anything about it. Then the Duke decided to admit that he simply had nothing to say about it, which left the Duke quietly horrified. He decided that even if this bastard got on his knees and begged for forgiveness, nothing would help him. Unable to bear his son any longer, the Duke decided that they had nothing more to talk about. Leaving the room, the man sighed heavily as he began to analyze what was happening once again. First of all, it was not necessary to allow the son to spend his entire childhood with that nanny's daughter, because no one knew that he would turn out to be such an asshole. Realizing that serious measures were needed, the Duke decided that this could not be trusted even to the butler and decided to fix the problem himself. Meanwhile, Bernard realized that because of his prank, there was a disagreement between the two families. But in order to explain himself to his family, he had to tell them about the Rhine, which he could not do. He understood that he had gone too far with the blow, but his act was justified, because Reina even dislocated her leg. Although, be that as it may, it was still not necessary to resort to violence, and the hero understood that his father was so disappointed in him for the first time. It was hard for him to bear it, and Bernard realized that his feelings were more vulnerable than his body. At the moment, he had been sent to the mansion and suspended from work, but that wasn't such a problem. The problem was that he hadn't seen the prince or Jed again since that day, so there was no one to ask for advice. And now, the hero was at a loss, not knowing whether to read the book or think it over again, or go swing his sword. Most of all, he was angry with Chimera, who at first took him by surprise, and now was also going to kill Reina. But he was embarrassed by the expression on the heroine's face, in which sincere hatred for him was clearly read. However, Bernard knew for sure that she had no reason to have such feelings for him. He suddenly remembered that when they first met, Chimera was completely different. But she had changed dramatically since the day she suddenly demanded that the engagement be broken. Then she was calm and cold, like a completely different person. Could it be that at that moment the girl felt hatred for him? And what if everything happened at all because of a misunderstanding in their relationship? Feeling a chill run down his spine, the hero thought, what if he hit the one who was not guilty of anything? In that case, Bernard decided that he had to apologize to her at all costs. But then, who is the culprit of the attack on his precious beloved? Thinking about this, the hero missed Reina more than ever, not understanding who could want to offend her. Suddenly hearing the sound of a carriage, Bernard immediately ran to the window, afraid to even assume it. To his horror, he saw a carriage at the entrance to the mansion, including a small group of knights. But suddenly, his father came out from the side of the house, heading straight for the carriage. At this moment, the hero was almost certain that the Duke himself was the culprit of the attack. Watching the convoy set off, Bernard felt a wild terror and rushed to run. Deciding that his father was involved in the attack, he escaped from the mansion and mounted a horse and went in pursuit. On the way, he suddenly thought that how could Chimera know Reina's whereabouts? Later, when it began to get dark outside, the hero reached the house of his beloved. Hiding and watching, he noticed knights in the windows who were walking around the mansion and looking for the girl. This meant that it was highly likely that Reina was still alive, which brought great relief to Bernard. His hand reached for the sword and the hero was ready to rush there to protect his love. And just as he was about to go, Jed suddenly appeared, grabbing his comrade by the sleeve. Bernard was furious, thinking that every second counted now, but the Marquis did not understand why he was so impatient. Putting a finger to his mouth, Jed hoped to calm the hero, because his girlfriend was safe and sound. Hearing that Reina was fine, Bernard immediately froze in place, looking at his comrade in surprise. Jed led him to her, and on the way decided that the hero was too straightforward and frivolous. Was he really going to go there and fight his father and his knights, hoping to defeat them alone? In any other situation, Bernard would not agree with his words, but this time was different. Previously, he wouldn't even consider it a problem, being sure that he could easily defeat several people at once. But now, the hero was unable to do anything with his sword, and punished himself for not being able to protect Reina. As hard as it was for him to admit it, Bernard now agreed with Chimera's words, and considered himself incapable of anything. So he decided to simply apologize to Jed for acting rashly. Considering his actions and behavior extremely strange, the Marquis did not imagine such a picture at all. The perfect world that Jed dreamed of is about to turn into real chaos. Initially, the Marquis did all this solely for his own interest. However, now something had to be done, because Bernard's condition was worse than expected. But be that as it may, it was worth the effort in any case. In addition, the condition of the hero was not the only problem at the moment. Since Bernard's mind was now clouded, he could be deceived by anyone. If nothing changes, then the hero will lead the Imperial Guard, which completely suited Jed. And wanting to get rid of everything that could prevent this, the Marquis led Bernard to a small house. When the hero learned that he had brought Reina here, he was inspired and hurried to enter. Bernard also found out from Jed that he had left a replacement in the mansion, and now Duke Demeter thinks that the problem has been solved. The hero was sincerely grateful to him for saving Reina, and was going to certainly repay him in the future. However, after staring at Jed, Bernard wanted to know what or who he meant by replacing the girl. Surprised by such a question, the Marquis decided that the hero was really an unusual person. At some moments he was hopelessly stupid, and at other times he was too smart. Deciding to act and speak more cautiously, Jed pretended to simply leave a corpse there that looked like Reina. Of course, Bernard would be very upset if he knew how it really was. The Marquis could not fully decide whether he liked this trait in the hero or not. Believing that he had gone out of his way to save Reina, Jed also wanted to show Bernard something interesting. Opening the wooden door in the corridor, the Marquis realized that he could not show only his good sides. After all, you can't cut off the bad side. Besides, he had to embellish the situation a little. Behind the door was a small room, and seeing Reina huddled in a corner, as well as two tied men lying in front of her, the hero was taken aback. According to Jed, the two were knights of the Demeter family who had seen a real lady. The Marquis was lucky to find a corpse that looked like Reina, and he believed that he was able to take her away from Bernard's father. But then it happened, and he had no choice but to bring the two men here. It was enough for one person to find out that there was only a replacement in the house and everything would be over. Therefore, Jed saw the only rational way out of this situation to kill these knights immediately. However, the Marquis could not do this on his own, as they were people of the Bernard family. Therefore, he decided to leave it to the hero himself, for which he left them here. Jed understood Bernard's precarious position, but now he had to act decisively. Finding himself at a crossroads, everything was clouded in the hero's head, and before his eyes was a choice, to kill or to let go. Also, the Marquis did not deny that the knight's word could be trusted, and if they promised to keep silent, they would surely keep their oath. Numb from the tension hanging in the air, Bernard looked at Reina in confusion. The girl also looked at him with empty eyes, in which there was no longer life, but only tears remained. The next day, as agreed, Chimera and her mother went in a carriage to the hot springs. The path lay through an area in which the roads were much worse than in the capital, and the woman was a little worried about her daughter. She decided that the heroine could sleep a little to make it easier to endure this path. However, seeing what an ideal posture her mother was sitting with, the girl could not afford it. In any case, she was so excited about this trip that she just couldn't sleep. But still, opening her eyes after a while, Chimera still managed to doze off. Turning to her mother, the girl wondered what she was doing now. As it turned out, the woman was still sitting and reading, which puzzled the heroine a little. Deciding to find out what kind of book it was, Chimera carefully looked at the cover. However, the woman held the book in such a way that it was impossible to see the title. Noticing a drawing in the corner of the cover that looked like a palace, the heroine thought that these were the laws of the palace. Suddenly, the woman was distracted from reading and noticed that her daughter had woken up. Smiling sweetly at her, she immediately began to frantically hide the book next to her. Surprised by this, Chimera did not understand why her mother was so confused. Suddenly, she was still able to see the title of the book and, as it turned out, it was a love story. The heroine fell into a stupor, not understanding whether her heartless mother, who is not interested in other people, can read such a thing. Seeing that the girl understood everything, the woman sadly lowered her gaze, which confused Chimera. Now the heroine understands why her mother does not like to be with people, because she is simply not comfortable with them. This even applied to her own child, so it was surprising that she liked such books. Suddenly, the woman thought that it probably looked peculiar, but Chimera immediately began to deny it. She pretended that she just wanted to read something like this, but there was no such opportunity. It was a lie because, in fact, the heroine does not read such people, since it is not to her taste. Many girls wanted to read romance novels, but Chimera was not interested in it at all. In addition, she herself had to play the role of a villain who interferes with a love couple. Therefore, instead of love, she thought about her duty and responsibility, and also realized that you need to value common sense. But on the other hand, it was not for her to say this, because Chimera knew that if he became the husband of this man, he would treat her badly. Suddenly, the mother took out one of the books and handed it to her daughter, thinking that she might like it. Meanwhile, Jed stood in the office, watching from the window. At the same time, Bernard stood in front of the bound knights, frozen in place with a drawn sword in his hand. The atmosphere was heated to the limit, and it was necessary to decide what conclusion to come to in this situation. From all this, the hero began to have a headache, and everything floated in front of his eyes, as if in a fog. Looking at him, the Marquis thought that it would be possible not to kill the knights and just take Reina. However, in his opinion, it was too simple, boring, and stupid, so he enjoyed the process with a smile. In addition, not knowing a love relationship, Jed wondered how much these people were ready to endure pain and how long they would be able to do so. At this time, Bernard's head was a complete mess, and he could not decide what to do now. Most of all, the hero wanted to escape now, but he couldn't do it since Reina was here. At all costs, Bernard intended to protect his beloved. He understood that, according to the Marquis, it was not necessary to kill the knights, but it was also dangerous to let them go. First of all, this could threaten the life of the girl herself, which was unacceptable. After all, it was always easier to attack than to defend, especially when the opponent was the father. Bernard knew that even if he came across a body that looked like Reina again, it wouldn't work. Immersed in these thoughts, he suddenly heard the girl cry. Deciding that there was no time to delay, the hero wished that Jed would take Reina out of the room for a while. When this happened, he slowly approached the lying knights, who were emitting a barely audible moan. After a while, the Marquis and the girl continued to stand in the corridor, not taking their eyes off the door. Suddenly it began to open and Reina was glad to see Bernard coming out. At the same moment, the hero took her in his arms, trying to collect his thoughts after what he had done. His right hand and cloak were soaked in blood, and Bernard wanted the girl to stop crying because everything was fine now. Apologizing to her, he decided that now he would definitely be able to protect her. For a moment, Jed stared at them in silence, giving the heroes a little rest. After that, he suddenly decided to admit that in fact, Reina's substitution was a living person, and not a corpse. Hearing this, the girl's eyes lost life again and filled with horror, and Bernard was numb with shock. Jed hoped it wouldn't bother them so much, because the most important thing was that Reina was saved. Therefore, he decided that as a thank you, the hero could help him with the burial. Meanwhile, continuing on the way, the heroine did not want to read the book at all, but it was a good opportunity to get closer to her mother. In this regard, she accepted the book from her with a smile, deciding that she would definitely read it. Hearing this, the woman lit up with joy, looking at her daughter with a smile. And at this time, the carriage drove up to a small building standing not far from the road. It turned out to be the inn they had to stay at on their way to the hot springs. Mom continued to open up to Chimera from a new side, preparing water for washing on her own. She also chose her own clothes and changed clothes. In other words, she could take care of herself. In comparison, the heroine could not even put on simple clothes alone, desperately trying to button them. To do this, she had to seek help from her mother, which the woman was very happy about. Of course, they could have originally taken a maid with them, but my mother did not want strangers to be there. Chimera sincerely hoped that if she did not bother her, then her mother would also be able to turn to her for help sometimes. Before that, the heroine always believed that her mother was a real noblewoman among noblewomen. But as it turned out, a woman could do a lot on her own, without needing guardianship. Looking thoughtfully at the ceiling, now Chimera finally knew what her mother was like. The woman's expression was always cold and stern, as if she was completely devoid of emotion. With a powerful posture that looked like it was made of steel, she didn't lean back, even if her chair had a backrest. Even with her daughter, the mother never relaxed, maintaining the image of an ice lady. But when Chimera received a slap in the face, the woman immediately ran to her, and even in pajamas. Therefore now, the girl did not know what she knew about her mother at all, and did she know at least something about her? Suddenly, the woman knocked on the door, wanting her daughter to help her open the door. The girl immediately ran to the door, and opening it, she saw her mother with a tray in her hands, on which there was food. Entering the room, the woman decided to clarify that perhaps the heroine would not like it very much, since she cooked it herself. Falling into a stupor, Chimera was shocked that her mother even knew how to cook herself. As it turned out, she learned this in childhood, and did the same when she went on a trip or for recovery. However, this is not something that a miss from a noble family should learn, so the woman has never taught her daughter to do so. The heroine was fascinated by the beauty of these dishes, wanting to try them as soon as possible. Sitting down at the table, she took a spoon with a little trepidation and scooped up some soup, not knowing what to expect. To her surprise, the taste was excellent, in no way inferior to the external splendor. A blush appeared on the woman's cheeks, and she was glad that her daughter liked it. At that moment, Chimera felt that she and her mother were talking normally about something for the first time. At the same time, she felt some kind of fulfillment from the depths of her heart. Later, they got back into the carriage and continued to the hot springs. It was the heroine's first long trip, and she relaxed too much. Now she began to feel very sick, and the girl felt nauseous. But she had to restrain herself, because if she created problems, then her mother would probably not take her with her on the trip anymore. Chimera wanted the trip to go with a bang, and they would have good memories. However, her condition was written on her face, and at some point, Helen could not stand it anymore and decided that it might be worth taking a break. Refusing, the heroine thought that she was not so tired and could endure. At the same moment, the woman ordered the coachman to stop the carriage immediately. Stopping, the mother was the first to get out of the carriage, followed by her daughter, breathing a sigh of relief in the fresh air. From now on, Helen wanted her daughter to talk about it right away if she bothered her. After all, if she is not feeling well, then this is not a sign of lack of responsibility. The woman wanted to raise a responsible child, but it was too much. Chimera thanked her mother for her care from the bottom of her heart, and Helen smiled again. In her opinion, the happiness of parents was to always be close to their children. Therefore, the woman was grateful to Chimera for making her happy. Without holding back tears, the girl believed that she was much more grateful to her mother. After a while, they finally arrived at the place for recovery. There was a forest and beautiful flowers around, which the heroine liked very much. At this time, Helen was inspecting the plants, deciding that they were blooming quite well. There was not a cloud in the sky, but suddenly, out of nowhere, a large cloud appeared, bringing rain with it. From surprise, Chimera froze in place, looking at the sky in bewilderment. Hearing from her mother that everything was fine, the girl turned her confused gaze to her. Taking her daughter by the hand, the woman quickly led her towards the forest, to a large tree. Under its leaves, they were able to find a place where the rain did not fall and decided to sit out there. Before that, Chimera had never thought that it was possible to hide from the rain under an ordinary tree. As she was about to share her impressions with her mother, she suddenly felt a strange movement on her shoulder. Looking there, the girl, to her horror, found a large green caterpillar that was slowly crawling along it. At the same moment, she screamed loudly, closing her eyes in fear and began waving her hand. With a straight face, the mother calmly took the caterpillar with her fingers and placed it on the ground, on the other side. After that, Helen tried to calm her daughter, because these small insects would not harm her. Shaking with fear, the heroine did not understand how her mother could remain so calm and even remove an insect with her bare hands. Then the woman stood up and decided to admit that she had grown up in the village. At the time, Helen was living in a small mansion that is deep in the woods. That is why she believed that life in the capital was completely unsuitable for her, because she grew up having seen freedom. Listening to all this, Chimera was shocked and rounded her eyes at the woman. Helen believed that due to her childhood, she was not fit for the title of mistress of the Armin family. She hoped to raise a daughter who could accept this title with dignity, but now she thought that perhaps this path was not for her. The heroine found out that her mother had not lived in the city since birth, and she cooked for herself and walked in the forest. Standing up and reaching out into the rain, Helen decided that it would soon be over. Meanwhile, Chimera realized that her mother had never liked the capital, her hometown, and most of her life in general. When the rain finally stopped, they began to look at the flowers again, and as it turned out, Helen was very good at them. Before that, Chimera had no idea that her mother had such a hobby. As it turned out, the woman liked to understand wild plants and weeds, rather than houseflowers. She also liked to find familiar flowers and herbs when riding home in a carriage. For this reason, Helen decided to teach it to her daughter so that she could experience it too. Looking out the window, the heroine remembered that she had never seen grass on the roadside before. But as my mother said, when she met familiar plants, this place seemed more native, and her soul became lighter. By evening, they finally reached their destination, stopping the carriage near the large gate. In this place, everyone was allocated housing that corresponded to the rank of the guest. It seems that this year is quite calm, which means that it will be possible to stay in a good place. Last year, Helen was upset because a foreign archduchess stopped at the same time. But now, meeting the ladies at the entrance, the employee of this place escorted them to the mansion. As it turned out, this house was the best of all, according to Helen, who was completely delighted. A hot spring immediately came out of this mansion, and the woman thought that her daughter might want to swim right away. Later, it finally got dark outside, and Chimera and her mother enjoyed hot water in the spring. The heroine felt relaxation go through her entire body, from the top of her head to her toes. Looking to the side, she noticed that her mother looked incredibly calm. The girl was surprised because she was already getting too hot, and she did not understand. Is it really the only thing for her? Hearing from the woman that she was a little cold, Chimera was confused. At the same moment, having lost consciousness from overheating, the heroine disappeared under the water surface of the spring, terrifying her mother. Later, sitting by the bed next to her daughter, Helen did not understand why she thought only of others. Chimera tried to apologize, but her mother did not blame her, only wishing that her daughter would not overwork herself like this. At this moment, the girl wondered if her mother knew what she liked when she looked at her with such kindness. When Chimera exhausts herself a lot and then receives such care, she feels incredibly happy and safe. Therefore, for the sake of my mother's good attitude, she was ready to stew in water as long as necessary. Later, when she felt better, the heroine went for an evening walk along the forest. After looking at the big moon and the starry sky, she decided that she, like her mother, really liked such things. Suddenly, the heroine heard a strange noise coming from the bushes. The rustling of the leaves began to intensify, and Chimera thought that a wild beast was about to jump out. But suddenly, a little girl appeared from behind the bushes, in a light dress and with bright pink hair. This was too unexpected for the girl, and she froze, looking at her guest in confusion. After recovering a little from the shock, she wondered where this girl was here and who she was. Seeing the heroine, the baby was horrified, not understanding where she was and how she got here. From such a reaction, Chimera jumped and smiled at the little guest. First of all, she wanted to know what kind of family this girl was from. If she got lost, the heroine could call a maid who would show the way. Looking carefully at the little girl introduced herself, calling herself Farron Millerst, the youngest daughter of the Earl of Millerst's family. Realizing that this was the first time she had heard about this family, Chimera decided that it was someone from the locals. Suddenly, pointing her finger at the bandaged hand of the heroine, Farron suddenly decided that her husband had hit her. Taken aback by such a statement, the heroine at first did not even understand what she heard. However, when she realized this, she immediately began to deny it, hiding the sore hand behind her. Looking at her sternly, the girl was sure that the stranger was lying to her. She understood this, as her sister also refused to admit that her husband was beating her. Suddenly, Chimera realized that both in her past life and in this one, she was really beaten by her husband. But immediately, the girl stopped herself, because since she returned, then now she and Bernard were strangers to each other. Deciding that there was no need to be so sensitive, the heroine again began to deny Farron's words. But suddenly, the girl put her palm to the girl's face, deciding that her cheeks were just like her sister's. In addition, she remembered her mother's words that you can't be with such men and they need to be punished. Sitting down opposite and patting her on the head, Chimera completely agreed with her. In no case should you communicate with men who beat women. Smiling at the baby, the heroine hoped that the girl would have this in mind. Suddenly, Farron wondered if the girl was planning to continue to endure beatings because she thought she deserved it. As it turned out, she also heard this from her sister, whom the baby considered very strange. Chimera understood her feelings, but she believed that no matter what, she could not call her sister strange. After that, they went for a walk, during which the child spoke non-stop. As it turned out, Farron was tired of living in a remote place with nights and wanted to move to the capital, as well as attend a real ball. The heroine also found out that the baby's father is a military commander of the border guard on the outskirts of the state, and since they had never crossed paths, for this reason, Chimera did not recognize the girl's family. Remembering that there is a banquet hall in her mansion, the heroine decided that she would like to show it to Farron. At the same moment, the girl was completely delighted, began to circle around her and offered to give her a beautiful flower. Such behavior seemed to the girl to be very funny and cute at the same time. Despite the fact that the baby chattered non-stop and bombarded her with questions, Chimera did not feel dislike for her. Looking at Farron's naive smile, she herself did not understand why it was so. Suddenly, behind the backs of the heroines, a man's cry was heard, desperately calling for his sister. The young man wanted to say everything to Farron, but suddenly stopped, looking at Chimera in bewilderment. At the same moment, he disappeared behind the bushes, leaving no trace, which left both girls confused. Everything happened too quickly, and Chimera did not even have time to understand what it was all about. This guy turned out to be Ian Millerst, Farron's older brother, who went to the heroine's mansion to pick up his sister. He looked about the same age as Rizdel, and he hoped that his small and immature sister didn't cause problems for the girl. Looking at him, Chimera thought that if she had a younger brother, he would probably look about the same. She reassured the hero that everything was fine, and he and the baby had a good time. Ian wanted to answer something but immediately blushed and managed only to hiccup slightly. Farron wanted him to act as usual, as he looked very strange now. Stroking her head, Chimera decided that the girl should not be so rude to her older brother. In addition, it seemed that he was just very shy and had a hard time communicating. Unfortunately, the baby was not injured, and the meeting turned out to be very pleasant. However, now Farron had to go home, to which the little girl reluctantly agreed. At this moment, the hero unexpectedly took out a red rose and, thinking that the girl liked flowers, decided to give it to Chimera. Being in great embarrassment, he handed the rose to the girl, hoping that she would accept it. Looking into his eyes and remembering how Farron also wanted to give her flowers, the heroine came to the conclusion that they were really brother and sister. Approaching, she took the rose from his hands, thanking the hero and admiring the beauty of the flower. Ethan didn't seem to expect her to agree, as he looked at Chimera fascinated. Blushing with embarrassment, he could not take his eyes off the satisfied girl, and a spark of life appeared in his eyes. Smiling, he looked at the heroine so confidently, as if he now intended to give her flowers for the rest of his life. However, now she and her sister had to leave, and after saying goodbye, Farron decided that she would certainly come for another walk. The girl saw them off with a smile, listening to how her sister teased her brother and how indignant he was. It was a new experience for Chimera, as she met people who were not like the Capitals. Thanks to the brother-sister relationship she saw, she felt as if she had become younger. Deciding to forget about everything for a while, she leaned the rose against her nose and took a deep breath, letting in the scent of the flower. However, the very next day, she remembered the saying that love and cough cannot be hidden. As she walked during the day, she met Ian again, who thought it was an incredible accident. At the moment when the heroine looked into his eyes and saw herself, she experienced ambiguous emotions. As for the young man, his face was lit up, and his smile never left him. At one time, Chimera, with the same face and eyes, feverishly wanted to see Bernard after the first meeting. And now, the hero was also messing around her, in exactly the same way. She didn't understand why he happened to be in front of her mansion every time. He and his mother lived in the very last house, so there was no way he could have come here by chance. At the moment when he was about to give a flower, the heroine clearly saw cute ears on his head and a fluffy tail behind his back. Like a joyful puppy, he jumped around her, bringing the girl to a stupor. But be that as it may, Chimera again accepted the rose, thanking the hero. At the same moment, his face lit up even brighter, and Ian was genuinely glad that she liked it. After a while, she walked again in the company of Farron, who asked her a lot of questions about the banquet. Laughing, the heroine decided that the baby should learn to ask questions one by one and not all at once. Suddenly, they were called from behind by a man's voice, who hoped that the ladies would not object. Bringing the flower again, Ian wanted to join them, ostensibly to look after his sister. Shocked that it happened again, the heroine hid her shock under a smile, giving him consent. The girl was confused that every time she met Farron, he suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Later, sitting at the table and drinking tea in the company of ladies, the hero started a long monologue about military affairs and the peculiarities of fencing. This continued until his sister interrupted him abruptly, deciding that it was better for him to talk about this with his friends. Chimera was very happy about this, because she herself did not stop him, for fear of hurting his feelings. Now, she turned to Farron, knowing that the little girl really wanted to hear more about the capital. Even after that, the young man continued to pick a flower every day and give it to the heroine, and each time he pretended that it was just an incredible coincidence, as if he hadn't planned it. At the same time, on each such occasion, Chimera greeted her, took a flower and admired its beauty. And as soon as she smiled in gratitude, Ian looked completely dumbfounded. But he very quickly pulled himself together and began to smile at the top of his lungs, and his face lit up with happiness. Of course, it was obvious that he fell in love, and in another situation, the heroine would simply take a firm position. But because Farron was around, he had to be as polite as possible. At the moment when the baby ran up, the hero seemed to be upset, which made her think that her brother was sick. Chimera could not treat him as if he were an immature younger brother, seeing him radiant and sad. All this made her think of her past life, which she wanted to forget as soon as possible, like a bad dream. After all, every time in the behavior and communication of this guy, she saw a reflection of herself when she was married to Bernard. She was also worried about thoughts that perhaps her inaction was giving him false hope. Anyway, the Hansen region they were in now was on the edge of the empire. In reality, most likely, this would be the end of their communication, and as a result, these chance meetings would be a fleeting glimpse. However, Chimera was quite puzzled by the seriousness of his attention, and then the heroine thought that she was not too frivolous, because he looked very cute at the same time. However, this was not the only problem, and much more, she was worried about another point. The central and local nobility have completely different levels in the social world. It may sound cruel and heartless, but the harsh truth is that Chimera is a girl from the Armin family. Maybe that's why when my mother knew that Ian was coming to meet me, she didn't say anything. Moreover, she pretended that she did not know anything and simply left without unnecessary questions. And who knows, Helen got away with it because of her indifference or helplessness. But judging by the smile that was on the woman's face every time, it was her affection. Everything looked ambiguous, but the heroine definitely saw the warmth in her mother's eyes when she looked at her. Kamira herself hoped that Ian would not dissolve in his first infatuation, and it would not bring him pain. In the case of the heroine, the price she had to pay for such an oversight was too high. However, in the meantime, the heroine began to have different thoughts, and one day she decided to clarify directly. On this day, the hero again brought her a beautiful flower, finding the girl in the garden on a bench. Kamira was not completely sure that everything was exactly as she imagined. Therefore, the heroine decided to find out directly, does Ian really like her? Not expecting such a direct question from her, the hero was greatly discouraged. However, when he came out of his stupor, he happily admitted that it was so, and he was crazy about the girl. She was so beautiful that he remembered her every time he saw a beautiful flower. He liked Kamira so much. As he said all this, he literally beamed, directing all his feelings to the object of his sighs. Hearing this, the heroine sighed languidly, covering her mouth with her hand and lowering her eyes down. Frightened by such a reaction, Ian pretended that he didn't want to force her to do anything either, but just wanted to show sympathy. He just wanted to make her happy because he liked Kamira very much. Suddenly, the heroine realized that the hero was so timidly explaining his feelings to her, and this was fundamentally different from her behavior. Seeing the girl clutch her head, Ian was frightened and ran up to her. At that moment, Kamira was shocked to realize that in her previous life, her love was extremely selfish. When she fell in love, she thought about how to get and subdue this man. It turns out that she did not think about the feelings of her chosen one at all, which was quite cruel. Now, for the first time ever, it dawned on the heroine that she had taken the wrong position in the first place. Who knows, maybe it all happened because the heroine was initially too cruel, and maybe that's why she received much stronger cruelty in her direction in response. However, even so, Kamira still could not forgive Bernard. She only dreamed of a suitable opportunity to kill this man, and the thought of sparing him did not even flash through her mind, let alone forgiveness. While Ian was trying to bring the heroine to her senses, she did not dare to raise her eyes to him. The reason was that all this time, Kamira was comparing herself too much to the hero. This led to the fact that now she could not even look at him, all the time looking away. Because against the background of the timid and sweet Ian, the girl considered herself a big, dark spot. Later, after leaving it, the heroine was very worried, hoping that everything would be fine with the hero. Before that, when he was comforting her, she pretended that everything was fine and made a smile on Ian's face. Then he decided to offer a walk, but Kamira abruptly and coldly refused, after which she began to leave with lightning speed. Therefore now, she decided first of all to go to the wisest man and ask her for advice. Helen was sitting in an armchair enjoying the views from the window, and she was very surprised by her daughter's sudden visit. Seeing the worried face of the heroine, the woman immediately wondered what had happened to her. Instead of telling everything as it was, Kamira decided to ask her mother one question. The girl wanted to know if she had always looked selfish and self-satisfied in her mother's eyes. Helen didn't even raise an eyebrow at the question, just staring at her daughter silently for a short time. After that, she suddenly wanted Kamira to think about the answer herself. Smiling, the woman wondered if her daughter really considered her behavior selfish lately. Initially, the heroine was taken aback, looking in bewilderment at her mother, whose smile did not leave her face. But suddenly, the answer came to the girl's mind that she really behaved selfishly, because she did everything for herself. Then the mother decided that it was quite natural and not at all selfish to take care of her future. However, if the daughter asks her conscience and decides that she does not deserve such a fate, then this will be selfish. Kamira remembered that before that, she did not think of Rain as a person, seeing the girl only as an obstacle. In addition, Bernard's feelings for her are so immature that they could have completely diverged if the heroine had simply ignored her. Falling on her mother's lap in tears, Kamira realized that she considered herself only a victim, but what if she was also partly to blame? In response, the woman calmly noticed that her daughter was still so young. By patting her head, Helen knew that it was okay to make mistakes and learn from them. But you also need to take responsibility for them and make sure that you do not repeat such mistakes again. Despite the fact that the heroine did not know how to forgive, now she seems to have found at least one reason to leave everything in the past. Meanwhile, Farron caught her brother cutting a rose from their greenhouse again, with a strange smile on his face. Seeing a huge, homemade bouquet on his table, the little girl decided that he would soon be able to arrange his personal, floral beauty contest. Finally, noticing his sister, his brother, who was in the pink clouds, climbed up to hug, infuriating her. But this did not stop him, because Ian was incredibly grateful to Farron, who introduced him to Chimera. Most of all, he was interested in experiencing this feeling when you get married. Looking at him, the little girl decided that even though her brother was initially inadequate, now, apparently, he really went crazy. Feeling the urge to vomit from his calf tenderness, she kicked him flying to the other end of the room. But the smile still did not leave Ian's face, and Farron demanded that he wake up immediately. She was sure that he was doing all this in vain, because the heroine was already married. Hearing this, the pink world around the hero suddenly turned into a hopeless, thick darkness. He didn't believe it at first, because Miss Chimera had never mentioned her husband. But according to the sister, the reason for this was that her husband was just a terrible person. Farron believed that when they first met, the girl's hands were bandaged because her husband had beaten her. Therefore, she did not want her brother to be so immoral as to court a married woman. However, now that all the good things had crumbled to dust, the hero was only interested in whether her husband really beat Chimera. Taking his sister by the shoulders and looking into her eyes, he wanted to get an answer, and at the same time, greatly frightened the baby. Not understanding anything, she decided that her words were the pure truth, which she found out at the first meeting. At that moment, she saw such fury in Ian's eyes that she ran away from him screaming. Farron realized that her brother had been so uncharacteristically strange and unapologetic lately that she had let her guard down. Therefore now, the girl rushed to run, leaving the hero alone with the surging emotions. Not understanding how her husband could beat this kind and beautiful lady, the hero clenched his fist in fury. That evening, the heroine went out into the garden again to admire the plants in the moonlight. Suddenly she saw Ian, but the atmosphere was very different when he appeared. The hero, as before, wanted to give her a flower, but he looked completely serious. Not understanding anything, Chimera took the flower from his hands, looking at the guy in bewilderment. Looking at his dejected look, she concluded that something had happened last night. After a short pause, the girl decided to speak, but suddenly Ian interrupted her. Putting his hand on his heart, he wondered if the girl would agree to marry him. Coming into a stupor, the heroine was numb with shock and stared at him, digesting what she had heard. Suddenly, the hero thought that she had suffered from violence from her husband for too long, and he was sure that he would make her happy. Because, in his opinion, it was because of this scum that Chimera was so unhappy. Still in a state of shock, the girl didn't understand why he was saying such nonsense. Surprised by such a question, Ian did not understand if his words were not true. At the same time, he was already imagining how he would tell his sister for misinformation. Chimera also decided that Farron had misunderstood something because she really had problems with her ex-husband. However, the heroine had already broken off the engagement, and she herself was able to settle the issue with this man, as well as become happy. She was sure that when she returned to high society, certain problems could arise. However, Chimera was determined to do so. Besides, they had already exchanged slaps in the face. Reina even participated in this, and after the dissolution of the engagement, there was a discord between the families. Ian looked at the girl in amazement, as if he had been doused with ice water. Apologizing, he decided that it was time for him to go and hurried away, leaving no trace. A lot of time has passed since then, and one day, Chimera was drinking tea at the table, together with Farron. Suddenly, a hero appeared in sight who was slowly passing by. But only noticing the heroine's gaze on him, it suddenly evaporated, confusing the heroine. With the naked eye, it was clear that he was avoiding her, and it seemed that Chimera knew the reason for this. She didn't want to look for him and cause trouble for him, but instead, since the arm had already healed, the girl was preparing to return home. But before leaving, the heroine decided to say goodbye to everyone so as not to be selfish. Upon learning of her departure, Farron immediately ran and threw herself into Chimera's arms. She was sorry that the girl was already leaving, because the baby wanted to stay with her longer. Therefore, she really hoped that the heroine would always remember her. Taking such a promise from Chimera, Farron decided that in this case, the girl should invite her to her home. Laughing, the heroine immediately agreed, which made the girl incredibly happy. That same evening, she found herself in front of the hot springs mansion again, deciding to look at it as a farewell. But suddenly she was called from behind, and turning around, the girl saw Ian running towards her. He decided to follow in his father's footsteps and go to the army, but someday the hero was going to come to the heroine again. Therefore, having given her such a word, he reinforced it with a flower and a note, which he also handed to Chimera. After that, it instantly evaporated, not even allowing the girl to realize what was happening. However, at this moment, she still felt the happiest in the entire world. Later, sitting in the carriage, the girl thought that she could become a good memory for the hero, and it was wonderful. In a note he left, he compared the heroine to a cute bee and himself to a drop of honey waiting for her. Of course, this letter could not be called bad, but Chimera decided to seal it forever. First of all, she decided to do it for Ian's sake, so as not to embarrass him once again. The next day, after Bernard began to rest after work, he suddenly remembered the things he had put off. Lying in his bed, he again came to the conclusion that he must definitely apologize to Chimera. It was all a big misunderstanding, but even in that situation, he couldn't defeat his blood and just slapped her in the face. And at that moment, the flame of hatred burned in the girl's eyes, despite the fact that she herself breathed cold. Now the hero realized that even then, having learned about Rain, she must have considered herself betrayed. And in such a situation, having received a blow from him for no reason, the accumulated feeling of betrayal and anger grew into hatred. Therefore, Bernard came to the unequivocal conclusion that whatever it was, Chimera was completely right. While he was playing for time at one time, he had to act, but now nothing can be changed. However, he could start acting now, because one way or another, he had already made his decision, staining his hands with the blood of those knights. And now, finally gathering his thoughts and strength, Bernard decided not to delay. Coming to Jed, the hero thought that he should leave the family and perhaps he would not be able to see his comrade again. Before that, he realized that someone who killed the knights of his family could not become the head of his house. Moreover, Bernard realized that if he had to choose between his family and Reina, the choice would be obvious. Therefore, the first thing he did was go to his friend, with whom the hero had an appointment to play chess. Jed greeted him happily, holding the game box in his hands and hurriedly inviting Bernard to his place. But to his surprise, the hero just froze in place in front of the entrance, looking at him seriously. It was a great shock for the Marquis to learn that Bernard was going to leave the family. He also came here to say goodbye to his comrade, who was in complete bewilderment. Grinning nervously, Jed did not understand what kind of nonsense the hero was talking about. Instead of listening to such strange things, the Marquis wanted to start playing as soon as possible. However, Bernard was serious. The hero decided that he did not have time for children's games, and he urgently needed to start his own business. Deciding that they could not play for the rest of their lives, Bernard wished to take responsibility for his actions and accept the challenge of his fate. After that, he turned around and began to leave, while the chess fell out of the hands of the dumbfounded Marquis. Resolutely looking at the sky, the hero intended to give up many more things for the sake of creating his own path. When he returned home, Jed laid out the playing board and exposed the pieces, after which he began to move them around the board. Leaning back on the couch, he decided that playing alone was incredibly boring. Looking thoughtfully at the ceiling, the Marquis did not understand Bernard's behavior, as well as why there were so many variables in the future. In his desperation, Jed knew he didn't have the strength to get things back to normal. Before that, he firmly believed that he and the hero and his highness had the most stable structure of relations. However, why in this case is Bernard so diligently trying to escape from his role? There was nothing the Marquis could do to maintain his original fortune, so he had nothing to lose. In addition, the future that he had planned so carefully continued to change at an incredible speed. And it was necessary to take care of his friends as soon as possible in order to bring them both to their senses. Then, as before, no one would disturb them, and therefore, the Marquis decided to do his work in his usual style. Namely, he decided to remove all variables, and as soon as Max and Bernard came to their senses, everything would gradually return to normal. Meanwhile, Chimera finally returned to her house, standing in front of him and looking at the mansion. As she walked to her room, she immediately noticed Rizdel and Hannah, who were following her cautiously, barely containing their delight. While the heroine sat at the table and read the magazine, they stood nearby, and looked at her with puppy eyes. Unable to stand it, Kamira ordered Hannah to bring a snack and Rizdel to change the flowers in the vase. The girls immediately accepted the tasks with great enthusiasm and decided to do everything in the best possible way. Deciding that they looked like puppies, the girl decided to walk with them along the Street of Arts later. Wouldn't it be great to be there after such a long time? As it was decided, later they all went there together, and Kamira was completely delighted with being in this place. Walking along the Arbat, she heard a very pleasant melody from the side, which was played by a wandering musician. Admiring the magnificent sound, she handed over the money to the maestro through the maids. Going further, the heroine decided that this calm and pleasant street fully justifies its name and warms her heart. Suddenly, she turned off the main road and walked towards a building in the shadows. Realizing that Kamira wanted to visit the gallery of poor artists again, Rizdel thought that their mistress had a very kind heart. But the heroine herself could not help herself, since she really liked the local paintings. Joyfully going inside, she felt that the atmosphere of this place remained the same. Seeing an unusual painting on the wall, Kamira considered it rude on the one hand, but on the other hand, very passionate. Looking at her, the girl began to feel very good. However, it was very strange that there was no one in this place, as if everyone had abruptly disappeared. Even the director, as usual, did not come out to greet the honored guest in person. Hearing footsteps on the stairs, the heroine decided that finally someone had returned. But when she looked there, she froze in shock, staring at the marquis in bewilderment. Jed slowly descended, greeting Mistress Kamira from afar. He did not have the opportunity to meet her in person, so the marquis went for a trick, hoping that the heroine would not mind. He also hoped that she would not refuse him a quiet conversation. After showing her his hands, Jed decided that if she was uncomfortable around him, he would keep his distance. Showing her empty hands, he wondered, wouldn't it take time to strangle her from such a distance? However, in his opinion, there was nothing to be afraid of, for the Marquis had not come here to threaten. Then the heroine wondered why Marquis Rashnan was looking for her. Glad that she knew him, Jed decided that in that case, he would not introduce himself. He was very glad to meet him and hoped that his communication with the lady would take place without unnecessary formalities, purely in a friendly way. The heroine understood that this illegitimate son of the Marquis was a very difficult opponent, and it was impossible to leave, since he would find her again. Knowing also that it was better not to mess with him at all, she decided to end this conversation immediately. Not understanding what exactly he needed, Kamira had no desire to talk to him at all. As it turns out, Jed has come here to be her friend and share the good news. He also understood that he may have behaved quite rudely, and the heroine could be discouraged because of this. But nevertheless, he really just wanted to share with the girl some news concerning Bernard Demeter. Hearing this name, the heroine's face noticeably darkened, and her gaze was filled with hatred. However, this did not add to her desire to talk in any way, and Kamira silently turned around, starting to leave. But when she heard that the hero was going to marry Reina, she immediately stopped, frozen in place with surprise. She was shocked that Bernard had finally made this choice and, as the heir to an aristocratic family, had gone against his parents. The heroine was also surprised that such a cowardly person had the courage to follow such a thorny path. In this case, soon the hero will pay in full for fleeting passion and stupidity, so Kamira could not wait for the denouement. However, when she learned that he was also going to leave the family, the girl was shocked again. Jed thought it was ridiculous that the winner of the palace fencing tournament wanted to achieve happiness on his own with Reina. Confused, the heroine considered it impossible that such a person had such determination. In addition, having really gained courage, the hero will become truly happy by choosing this path. However, this simply could not be, which she did not restrain herself from shouting in the Marquis's face. She didn't understand why Jed had come this way to just stand there and lie. Looking at him suspiciously, Kamira wanted to know why he was trying to mislead her. But the Marquis was confident in his words, believing them to be the truth, and why would he lie at all? Realizing that she had no reason not to believe him, the heroine was petrified by the realization of what was happening. Looking at one of the portraits on the wall, Jed, as it turned out, was also surprised by the hero's decision. Therefore, it took him time to accept it too, because no matter how much he thought about it, Bernard's departure from the family was a great loss. The Marquis's interests coincided with the irritating Bernard, and he wondered if he could stop him. And then, Jed suddenly remembered another piece on the board, whose name was Kamira Armin. The Marquis understood that this was also not a very pleasant surprise for the heroine. Before drawing any conclusions, the girl wanted to understand what his true intentions were. So she had no desire to trust the words of a suspicious person, and she believed that he was definitely up to something bad. Jed couldn't disagree with this, so he decided that he would return to her and continue the conversation when Bernard left the family. However, by then it may be too late because this guy decided to get married right after leaving. Finding herself in a dead end again, Kamira did not know if this was true or a lie with which they were trying to break her. If this is a lie, then right now they are trying to lure the girl into a trap. But the heroine had the feeling that Marcus Rachnan was serious. She also did not understand why exactly Bernard decided to take such a responsible step. Was he risking everything for his own happiness because of the words she had said before? Realizing that the hero can really become happy, Kamira began to go crazy with anger. Turning to her, Jed decided that this was not the time to suffer, and if she wanted to give up, then go ahead, because the very thought of leaving seemed silly. Starting to laugh nervously, the heroine decided that even if everyone in the world became happy, Bernard must certainly suffer. After all, he was the one who ruined her life and turned her into a living hell. And if the hero just takes it and becomes happy, then what about the pain that Kamira experienced because of him? Having caused her such suffering, shouldn't he make up for it? The girl was comforted by the thought that he was dirt and would live a garbage life, but if this did not happen, then what would she do? Looking at the painting of Bernard and Reina, Jed decided that it deservedly hung in this museum. The hero really wanted to live with her, and they were a wonderful couple. In the picture, they looked happy, and it seemed that they were perfect for each other. The Marquis wondered if Kamira wanted Bernard to finally take responsibility for his actions. But the girl thought that this man was not even going to take her on. The hero just wants to start with a clean slate, and believes that it will be honest on his part, so it is useless to wait for an apology from him. If he decided for himself that he would leave the family and become happy, then this alignment did not suit the heroine. And, in her opinion, at the moment, the only way to make him pay for everything was to make Bernard unhappy. Kamira was sure that Jed had told all this explicitly, for a reason, with nothing to do. Therefore, she wanted to hear a straightforward answer. What does he want her to do? Stretching wearily, the Marquis was extremely pleased with the conversation with her. From now on, they became friends, and now their common goal was to ruin Bernard's happy life. By extending his hand to the heroine, he hoped to unite with her in order to jointly achieve success in the future. At this moment, the girl was well aware that if she really wanted a happy life, then she shouldn't shake his hand. But unable to bear that Bernard would be happy, she agreed and returned the handshake. At the same time, Kamira was a little frightened by how exactly Jed could behave, but she did not want to see a happy future for the hero much more. The reason was that in her previous life, since she had lost her child, she hadn't been able to take a single step out of the mansion. Later, sitting in his office, the Marquis thought that perhaps he had made a mistake somewhere. On the one hand, since the heroine was overwhelmed by emotions, it was extremely easy to control her. But there was a discrepancy in her gaze, which was incredibly heavy. This look pierced through, and at some point, the Marquis even felt like a victim himself. Initially, he just wanted to push Kamira to action and then watch from the sidelines. But in any case, this did not solve the main problem, which was Bernard himself. Whatever fly had bitten him, it was clear that he had decided to leave the manor, and now Jed could no longer use it. Then he suddenly thought that if everything didn't go according to plan, then maybe he could just kill Kamira? However, he immediately came to his senses, starting to dissuade himself because it was impossible. If the Marquis touches the forbidden treasure of the Armin family, then he will be unhappy with the treasurer. Therefore, the helplessness infuriated him because it was impossible to use the girl and it was also impossible to kill her. All that remained was to watch her and control everything, down to the smallest actions. Meanwhile, Bernard was on his way to Armin's mansion after he unexpectedly received an invitation from Kamira. He was very surprised to learn that he had to come in person, but in any case, it was a good chance to apologize. The hero understood that if he did not take the risk now, then it might be too late later. At this time, the heroine was waiting for him in the living room, deciding that she needed to move on. However, for this to happen, it was necessary to get rid of the pain, no matter how long it took. And the heroine also wanted to tear off the invisible shackles that tightly squeezed her arms and legs. In a moment of reflection, she heard the door behind her open and someone entered the room. Without even turning her face in his direction, Chimera only noticed that despite everything that had happened, the hero found the courage to come here. In order to talk to him, she sent a letter through the butler and used one of the maids to accompany him around the mansion. However, the girl did not say a word about this to her father and mother, deciding not to disturb them. First of all, she invited Bernard to sit on the sofa opposite her. Wanting to discuss something with him, she turned her head in the direction of the hero and was confused. Sitting on the floor, on his knees, Bernard realized that a verbal apology was impossible, but even so, he really wanted to apologize for that incident. Surprised by his actions, Chimera found them funny because there was already a conversation about how she did not need his apology. Sadly lowering his head, the hero understood it as well as she did. But he also admitted that he had behaved very rudely towards Chimera last time and wanted to make amends at all costs. The heroine was completely taken aback, hardly believing that he really asked for forgiveness for the slap. But why, when she lost the child, did this man not say a word? Instead, he looked at Chimera with a cold gaze, as if he despised her. But suddenly the girl realized that this time, like everything that was in it, simply ceased to exist. This, in turn, means that she will never receive an apology for that incident. Now she had the feeling that it was not a benevolent god who helped her, but a real devil. Grinning, she understood what it meant to be the only one who knew about that time. So now, she wondered if Bernard was ready to take on any responsibility. Having received a decisive agreement, she decided that the price of his ignorance would be the right hand of the hero, which horrified him. After a short silence, he thought that in such a case, he would not be able to hold a sword. Smiling, Chimera thought it was a joke, because she couldn't really demand such a thing, could she? If Bernard was ready to atone for his guilt, there was only one way to apologize to the heroine. Now, Chimera decided to show him what she was really capable of. First of all, she wanted the hero to fulfill his duty and not leave the family. Since her life had been ruined because of him, the girl wanted him to carry this burden now. Not knowing how he felt, being blocked from all sides, Chimera only wanted to enjoy his pain. She lay awake all night, thinking that Bernard wanted to marry his beloved. She was tormented by questions. Was it necessary to steal his treasure or just kill Reina in front of him? Or maybe it's better to wait until Reina is pregnant and then kill their child in front of the parents? All night the heroine stewed in such thoughts, wanting the hero to pay for all the suffering in full. She did not consider herself cruel, but if Bernard was in her place, he would definitely be sad that he could not achieve his love. Therefore, Chimera also wanted the hero to introduce her to his beloved, with whom she wanted to be friends. After a while, after meeting Jed and hearing that he did not know about the reasons for Bernard's love for Reina, the heroine considered him incompetent. However, the Marquis did not see any point in this knowledge, since the girl would not be killed anyway. Starting with their first meeting in the gallery, Chimera and Jed's relationship became extremely strange. He thought that the heroine would ask him to kill Reina, so he came here. But Chimera knew that the girl was personally patronized by Bernard, and she wondered what the Marquis felt for his beloved. Jed considered Reina to be the destroyer of the hero and did not want to see such a woman next to him. In addition, he considered it a completely natural thing to do for someone who wants to protect his friend. Considering this conversation a waste of time, the Marquis wanted to leave, but the heroine decided that if he did something to Reina, she would tell the hero everything. And it doesn't even matter if she has proof, because the friendship in which he sowed doubts can no longer be considered as such. The existence of such a clear suspicion can destroy everything, calmly and slowly. Chimera understood that the moment they recognized each other's weaknesses, their relationship could be considered soured. Shocked by what he heard, Jed did not understand why she was so smart, pretending to be stupid next to Bernard. Did she just decide to laugh at the Marquis, or was the girl just bored? In fact, at that moment, it seemed to the heroine that something took possession of her to such an extent that even now she could not understand it. She spoke as if it had happened a long time ago, but the Marquis knew perfectly well that it was only a few months ago. Therefore, Jed began to suspect that there was really something wrong with the girl's head. Maybe her emotions were just out of control. Grinning, Chimera decided that then he had better immediately recognize her as crazy, otherwise why say such nonsense? And can he say like someone else when he himself wants to kill his friend's beloved? However, the Marquis believed that he really cared about his friends, playing the role of a gardener who had to eliminate pests. But the only thing these words did was make the heroine, who thought it was all nonsense, laughing. Then Jed decided that a task that could be completed in a few months was now stretched out indefinitely. According to the Marquis, only a madman could dream of torturing people forever. Therefore, he considered the girl as such, and himself, on the contrary, considered normal, since he wanted to quickly resolve this issue. Looking at him furiously, Chimera realized that in the end, this man had managed to anger her. Though they had met a few times before, Jed quickly became impatient. After all, wouldn't it have been better to slowly enjoy the show? But the Marquis continued to twirl his finger at his temple, looking at the heroine. Approaching him, the girl knew that if she was crazy, then he wouldn't even want to mess with her. After that, the Marquis fell silent, and Chimera concluded that this conversation had an effect on him. The look he was looking at her now was very familiar to the girl. Previously, a dog lived in their house that could not go to the toilet on its own. And then, the butler looked at her with similar eyes, after which she quickly relieved herself. The heroine did not like that Jed looked at her with such eyes, but there was nothing she could do about it. However, if the Marquis suddenly had a foolish thought, he had better forget it at once. After all, in case something happened to her, Chimera used a cipher to put the documents in different places and hid them. In addition, she knew for sure that her parents did not mind moving in the event of her death. In fact, Jed seemed to expect to hear something like that from her. As for Reina, he didn't see anything wrong with it, reaching for the document on the table. Squeezing him into a ball, the Marquis decided that it was from the moment Reina appeared in the hero's life that everything went wrong. Laughing, the heroine wanted him to stop worrying so much because it looked very funny. After that, Jed left, and the girl decided that he looked extremely shabby. Therefore, she involuntarily imagined that he was a kitten who was taken by the scruff of the neck, which is why she could not hold back her laughter. Realizing that there were no excuses for her, Chimera set out to come up with the next step. After a while, calmly working in his office, Bernard unexpectedly received a strong slap on the head. Turning around and seeing Jed standing with a straight face, the hero did not understand what he was doing. Continuing his work, he suddenly received an even stronger blow again, becoming enraged. But as it turned out, in the Marquis's opinion, Bernard deserved to be beaten, so he hit him. Grabbing his sword, the hero looked furiously at his comrade, considering him crazy. At the same moment, Jed drew his blade, calmly looking at Bernard and preparing to defend himself. A moment later, the blades of their swords touched each other in a frantic dance, and the eyes of the heroes were fixed on each other. The Marquis was infuriated that he did not wait for Bernard to let his guard down, because he could have hit him again. Meanwhile, a luxurious carriage stopped next to Reina's mansion. Comfortably sitting inside her on the sofa, Chimera carefully watched from the window. The words of the hero sounded in her head after the demand to introduce the girl to her. On that occasion, Bernard decided that if Reina died, he would blame the heroine and her family and kill anyone who hurt her. At that moment, he looked like a mother who was desperately protective of her child. Chimera never thought that love for a girl clouded the hero's mind so much. She already knew how his family would react to Reina when he officially announced her. In addition, in a past life, the heroine put her whole soul into the struggle, in which she did not have a chance to win. And now she realized that there are times when it is difficult to understand people's emotions, even living a second time. A little later, a servant helped her out of the carriage by giving the lady his hand. After looking around, Chimera was impressed by the incredibly peaceful environment around her. Suddenly, she noticed a blonde girl who was playing catch-up with the children. Reina lived in her own world, under reliable protection, without facing reality. Suddenly, one of the children crashed into the heroine, after which he looked at her carefully. At the same moment, frightened by the lady's cold gaze, the boy began to run away in fear, begging for forgiveness. Reina smiled, deciding that it was better for him not to run far, because it would not save him from washing his face anyway. Chimera took a step forward and called out to the girl, after which all the children hid behind her. Seeing the surprise in Reina's eyes, the heroine suddenly realized that now was their first meeting in this life. Then, Chimera decided to introduce herself first, not understanding whether Mr. Bernard had not informed the girl about her arrival. The heroine understood that it was necessary to behave appropriately. However, it was incredibly difficult for her to hold back her laughter. Reina continued to look at her in bewilderment, when suddenly it dawned on her. She remembered that the hero had indeed warned her and was very glad to meet Lady Armin. Smiling, Chimera decided to continue the conversation in a quieter atmosphere. Beaming with joy, Reina agreed with her and invited the heroine to her home. Watching her closely, Chimera did not understand if this girl was really such a pure person. How was it possible to survive such a situation and remain so calm? After thinking about everything, the heroine came to the conclusion that she could not leave everything like this. She had heard that Reina had gone through many hardships, but her radiance was still with her. In particular, Chimera was very surprised at how friendly the girl greeted her. Hearing that, in the heroine's opinion, she hated her, Reina was stunned. Chimera wondered what kind of person the girl really was, and what could she say to this? She had to take off the angel mask herself, otherwise the heroine would have to reveal her true feelings. After all, does Reina really like to pretend to be innocent so much, playing the role of a fool in love? While Chimera was spinning these thoughts in her head, the girl silently lowered her gaze, not rushing to answer. But suddenly she began to cry, deciding that if Lady Armin was angry with her, then Bernard would be sad. Therefore, smiling sweetly at the heroine, Reina decided that everything was in perfect order. In addition, the girl did not understand how she could hate Chimera at all, being an ordinary nanny's daughter. Looking at her thoughtfully, the heroine found Reina's answer very interesting. The girl looked at her calmly, but it seemed to Chimera that this look was full of fierce malice. In any case, according to the heroine, Reina has already realized that they will never get along with each other. Without saying anything more, the girl turned towards the house and went to open the door to let the guest in. At this time, Chimera decided that although it was beneficial for her to break off this terrible relationship, she would never give up revenge. After all, her only desire was to avenge her child. Deciding that it was unlikely that its assortment would appeal to an aristocrat, Reina wondered what kind of tea Lady Armin preferred. She also understood that perhaps the heroine did not want to drink tea at all, but instead wanted to talk about something. However, instead of having awkward conversations, Chimera decided to go straight to the heart of the matter. She wondered if the girl could marry Bernard. Would she take this chance? Looking away, Reina didn't know what the honorable lady meant by that. Looking furiously at her, the heroine was shocked by such a character of the girl. Didn't she herself claim that she sincerely loved him and was ready to do anything for the hero? Chimera wanted to know if this meant that Reina, for him, was ready to go even to hell. She had originally planned to trap her with sweet talks about a wonderful future with Bernard, but now she had a better plan. And now, if the girl allows the heroine to be her angel, then she was ready to give her a chance. However, Chimera needed to be sure that even with a painful death, Reina was ready, for the sake of her love, to climb into hell. The girl rounded her eyes with horror when she heard such words from the heroine. Smiling at her, Chimera hoped that Reina would allow her to become her fairy godmother. At the same time, the heroine decided that the girl would pay her with her suffering. She also hoped that Reina would think carefully, because it was a really good offer. However, the girl herself did not understand why Lady Armin gave her such an opportunity. Chimera knew that Reina would never be able to understand her, because she remembered how much pain this girl had caused her in a past life. It is for this reason that the heroine decided to return everything to her in double size. And now, with a smile, she thought that if Reina was not free, she would not be able to be happy. After a while, standing in front of the living room, Chimera realized that it seemed that her parents had learned about Bernard's arrival. In any case, since this has already happened, there is nothing to be done about it. Therefore now, the first thing to do is to decide what to do first. Entering the living room, the heroine silently sat down at the negotiating table, calmly looking at her parents. His father and mother were also calm, but there was wariness in their eyes. Deciding to start the conversation first, Chimera admitted that she was thinking of forgiving the hero. Hearing such a statement, Helen lowered her gaze thoughtfully and Fell immediately jumped from his seat in shock. Thinking that his daughter still wanted to marry the one who hit her, the man was confused. Then the heroine immediately decided to calm him down, because she did not plan such a thing at all. Instead, she wanted to help him marry his beloved, which made even the cold-blooded mother's eyes round. Unable to stand it, the father screamed, completely unaware of what Chimera was talking about. But when he saw the heroine's calm and confident gaze, as well as remembering who Bernard's lover was, he realized that it was a plan for revenge. Meanwhile, the girl thought about how she had always wanted to be a wonderful daughter for them, so she often hid her emotions. Still calm, Helen was only interested in whether her daughter was confident in her actions. Hearing that Chimera had thought everything over and made an informed decision, the mother was surprised, because she believed that the heroine was upset. In response, the girl wondered if her mother really liked the hero so much. She knew it was a matter to upset Helen, but for some reason she was happy inside. Even if it was a small part of the pain she had endured, Chimera was pleased to know that the people around her were getting it back. And although the heroine herself understood that it was very mean on her part, but at the same time, it was true. In addition, if the parents can show their sincerity, then perhaps the heroine will love them again. Their daughter has always been incredibly kind, but it seems that her kindness died that day. And now, Chimera hoped that her father and mother would help her, because they themselves admitted that they loved her. At the moment, bringing Bernard and Reina together was her lifelong wish, and once it came true, the heroine would be obedient again. Knowing that her parents loved her, Chimera wished with all her heart that they would help her. In their previous life, they didn't know how much she had suffered, and if they had, they would have saved her. And now, the heroine was wondering if they would be able to fulfill this request and help her, for her. Instead of answering, Helen suddenly got up from the couch, staring at her daughter. Coming up and hugging her tightly, the mother decided that if this calmed her daughter, then she would help her. Because now, a woman loved her daughter more than anyone else, and her father thought the same. In gratitude for accepting her stubbornness, Chimera decided that only this time she would behave like this. After talking to her parents, the heroine went to her room, where she began to wait for Benon to arrive. Abruptly opening the doors, the doctor flew into her chambers, hoping that everything was fine with the mistress. He was very worried about the heroine since her ex-fiancé treated her badly. Benon remembered that she was so fragile that she couldn't even sleep because of the curtains in her room. It was a time when she was very young, and the girl was surprised that he still remembered that time. Noticing that the heroine's complexion had deteriorated slightly, the doctor fell at her feet with tears. Realizing that she didn't sleep well at night, he decided to give her a special medication that helps her sleep better. Looking thoughtfully at the jar of pills, Chimera was grateful to Benon for his care. Taking them for the night, the heroine really turned off very quickly and slept soundly until late in the morning. When she woke up, she couldn't even remember the last time she felt so good. Going out on the balcony, she decided that she needed to try to persuade the hero to introduce Reina to her family. However, this is definitely not today, because the girl did not want to spoil such a great mood with something like this. Later, she went for a walk in the garden, accompanied by Rizdel and Hannah. Looking to the side and seeing the marigolds, Reina appeared in her mind's eye, putting Chimera into a stupor. At that moment, the heroine, for no particular reason, remembered that very day. During their last meeting, Chimera found out that the only hell for the girl was the impossibility of being with Bernard. Therefore, without holding back tears, she was sincerely grateful to Lady Armin for her support. Even now, with the passage of time, these words infuriated the heroine. Because of this, Chimera realized that Reina was really capable of angering her. As it turned out, the heroine hated this girl with all her heart, who ruined her life. On that occasion, she made it clear that since Reina was about to marry Bernard, the girl should call her Miss Chimera. For the first few seconds after these words, the girl looked at her with confusion in her eyes, not understanding if she was really allowed to do this. But, gathering the courage, she was able to do it, happily smiling at the heroine. Such joy on Reina's face caused Chimera to have a fit of rage and a desire to send this girl to real hell. The heroine hated Reina because she considered herself the one who deserved the right to be happy. However, should Chimera really destroy it with his own hands? Turning to her maids, she wanted them to immediately pluck all the marigolds in the garden and destroy them. The heroine understood that crushing Reina with her own hands definitely did not satisfy her. For this, her own anger was not enough, because she wanted to return the true result of their happiness to these two. After a while, Reina washed the dishes in her house and remembered her acquaintance with Miss Chimera. She did not understand whether she and the hero would really not have to hide their feelings now, as they did now. The girl swam in thoughts that thanks to such a kind heroine, she would finally be able to be next to Bernard. And if they have children, then she will even be able to give them the hero's surname, and he will be able to fully raise them. What Reina could only imagine in her dreams was now happening, which made her dance happily. But also, remembering those terrible words of Miss Chimera about hell, she hoped that everything would be fine. One day, the girl was again doing housework, hanging laundry to dry. When everything was dry, she came to collect it and suddenly heard someone call out to her. Recognizing the voice of her beloved, Reina was completely delighted and joyfully turned to the hero. Bernard walked towards her with an extremely serious face, which puzzled the girl a little. Without giving a hint, she immediately threw herself into his arms, but the hero wanted to talk to her about something important. As he put Reina in front of him, he thought it was time to introduce her to her parents so that she could get their permission. However, it was important for him to know that the girl herself was ready for this, to which he received a decisive look in response. But the hero decided to once again emphasize that it would not be easy, and only if she wanted to, they would take this step. Remembering her conversation with Chimera and deciding to be brave, Reina gladly accepted this offer. Apart from this, she also knew how much Bernard himself wanted his parents to finally accept her. Looking confidently into his eyes, the girl decided that she wanted to become the Reina of Demeter. Hugging her tightly, the hero intended to protect his beloved at all costs. Soon, the entire mansion of the Demeter family was on its ears from the upcoming visit. The maids could not understand why Lady Armin decided to come, since there was a rather cold relationship between their families. The Duke and his wife were also delighted that the heroine accepted their son's invitation, considering it a very good sign. However, the man was a little puzzled by the fact that in addition to the arrival of Chimera, the son wanted to bring someone else to introduce them. But they consoled themselves with the fact that, probably because of excessive excitement, their son had made a slip of the tongue and was actually going to bring only Lady Armin. The Duchess wondered how their son managed to calm the heroine, but the father was sure that the hero just finally came to his senses. Ecstatic that their boy had finally embarked on the right path, the woman cried with happiness. Suddenly, a servant came in and the parents thought that Bernard and Chimera had finally arrived. This was true, but the servant could not find the words to announce the arrival of another guest. The Duke decided that the butler should not be so nervous and that he should greet the guests as quickly as possible. Heading to the entrance, he and his wife thought that the hero was worthy of admiration, since he was able to cope with this situation so quickly. Going out to the guests, the Duke threw out his arms to the sides, joyfully greeting his son and Miss Chimera. But suddenly, his gaze fell on the girl who was with them, causing the man's face to darken sharply. He, like everyone else, did not understand where Reina came from here and why she was with the heroine. Realizing that the conversation would not be easy, Bernard decided to continue it in the living room. Unable to hold back his emotions from shock, his father stared at him with his mouth open, and his eyes were full of horror. At this moment, Chimera felt deep pleasure, silently watching what was happening. Remembering her, the Duke greeted the heroine still being in turmoil. Ignoring Bernard and Reina passing by, he was grateful to Chimera for taking the time to visit them. Smiling sweetly in response, the heroine was also very grateful for the hospitality provided. After that, they all followed the Duke into the living room, walking through the corridors of the mansion. Standing up so that only Reina could hear them, the maids began to condemn her and insult her aloud. Sweating with horror, the girl pretended with the last of her strength that she did not notice it. Arriving at the living room, the two girls sat down together on the sofa, and Bernard and his parents sat opposite. For a while there was an awkward silence in the air, which terrified Reina and delighted Chimera. Sadly lowering her gaze, the girl thought that, as she had assumed, she shouldn't come here. It wasn't fair that Reina just loved Bernard, and everyone was already so eager to get rid of her. Therefore, the hero could not stand it, and even provided her with a separate apartment, the whereabouts of which remained a mystery to his family for a long time. The girl felt the happiest until she found out that the hero unexpectedly became engaged. She did not understand how this could happen and was completely confused. However, what can it do in this case, and how should it react to this? Realizing that she couldn't change anything, Reina decided to simply ignore the engagement and act like an innocent child. After all, even if the hero is engaged, he will still forever remain her prince. Being shocked by herself, the girl did not understand why she suddenly became like this. The only thing she needed was to be happy, but other people tried to take away even the insignificant things from her. Did everyone try to kill her just because the girl wanted too much for herself? And that time, during the acquaintance with Miss Chimera, it seemed to Reina that for a moment, the heroine's face became cruel. Despite the fact that the engagement had already been broken, she was afraid that Lady Armin would take Bernard away from her. If that happened, Reina was ready to hate Chimera, but now she decided to just smile sweetly. However, suddenly, the heroine offered her something different, which was fundamentally different from the girl's expectations. The fact that Miss Chimera wanted to help her be with the hero was akin to a wonderful dream for Reina. Therefore, looking at Bernard, she decided that under no circumstances would she give up. At this time, the butler of the Demeter family brought tea to the gentleman, and the hero wondered why he deprived only Reina. At this moment, the servant turned his gaze to the Duke, who was sitting with a completely unflappable look. But suddenly, the head of the family defiantly coughed, signaling to the butler not to bring tea. Then the servant pretended that it was a very rare tea, and he prepared the right amount. However, the servant did not expect another guest to appear, so the number did not add up. Reina immediately began to pretend that everything was fine and she was not thirsty, but the butler did not pay any attention to her. Instead, he offered the hero to bring ordinary tea for the girl, since everything was not so easy with rare tea. Reina was shocked that the servant was ignoring her so openly, even though she had interfered with his conversation with Bernard. Even in her direction, the servant brought the girl an ordinary tea, carefully placing it in front of her. After being humiliated by a simple butler, Reina no longer wanted to drink anything. In addition, sitting in this room, she clearly felt how much everyone hated her and wanted to run away. Barely holding back her tears, Reina did not understand why Bernard had even started talking about tea in the first place, since she was hated even more now. However, at the same time, she understood that she should not hate the hero, no matter what happens. After all, in any case, Bernard would be on her side, and with these thoughts, the girl looked at him confidently. Meanwhile, after drinking some rare tea, Chimera enthusiastically admired its wonderful taste. She was very grateful to the whole family of Demeter, who so cordially treated her to such delicious tea. Looking thoughtfully at Reina, the Duke was glad that this tea suited their tastes. In addition, he was very interested in the question, why did they all come today? Suddenly, the mother of the family stood up, pretending that she felt bad. Because of this, she decided to leave first. Reina watched as the maids led her by the arm, feeling very uncomfortable, as if it were her fault. Looking at her, Chimera calmly decided that this should have been the case from the very beginning. The girl did not want to give in to her and shamelessly resisted, which was very naive on her part. The heroine was interested in how long Reina would be able to do this, because now everything was just beginning. Soon, something would happen that the girl would have to go through, and Chimera was looking forward to it. In her past life, she had dreams of killing Reina with her own hands, but this time it will no longer be a dream. And now, the heroine has come here to offer to become the guardian of the girl, which she hastened to inform the Duke about. She pretended to hear about Bernard and Miss Reina's heavy love, and then she felt sorry for the hero. Therefore, Chimera wanted to help make Bernard's dream come true, which she once admired. In addition, her parents respected the wishes of their daughter and decided that if this marriage took place, they would forget about that situation with the hero. Having experienced a noble shock, the Duke could not immediately give an answer and decided that he would send it later by mail. Smiling sweetly at him, Chimera agreed to wait and give him time to think. The answer was not long in pressing, and soon the heroine received it and immediately began to read. The Duke agreed to her proposal, even though Bernard would not be the next head of the family. However, if the hero does become one, then no one will object that the child born to him from Reina will not be able to inherit the title. Tiredly resting her chin on her arm, Chimera did not understand why she was so worried about this letter. The parents wanted them to have a simple wedding, which would be attended only by relatives. The moment the girl enters with Demeter's family, there will be no need to worry about her education and position. Reina was firmly convinced that she would cope with it like a noble person, which made the heroine laugh a little. It seems that they are going to use the house rules and family customs to lure her into a trap and kill her. Reina will be locked in the house and being surrounded, she will never be able to escape. At this rate, Reina will break down and regret her choice, after which she will gradually wither away until she eventually dies. Admiring this perfect plan, Chimera felt her whole being stirred with impatience. Now it turned out that the heroine was leaving Demeter's house, and Reina was his prisoner. And at this time, the heroine will laugh at the suffering of Bernard's beloved, but in her eyes, she will be the one who sympathizes with her. And if the hero one day begins to blame Reina, then Chimera will be the first to stand up for her, clarifying, isn't she his wife, whom he must protect? It was like a past life, where after he hit the heroine, Reina stood up for her, believing that you should not beat your wife. With these thoughts in mind, Chimera wrote a reply to Duke Demeter that the Armin family would support the bride until the wedding. At this point, a new stage of life began, and now everything will not be the same as it was before. In any case, the temperament of the heroine was quite consistent with what she was going to do. A little later, Chimera came to the girl to check on her well-being. Entering her room and feeling deep despair floating everywhere, the heroine came to a stupor. The maid who was there immediately decided to leave, while Reina sat on the sofa staring at the floor. Greatly astonished, Chimera did not understand how this girl could be so weak. Even the heroine herself did not cry in her past life, when more terrible things happened to her than meeting the head of the family. Because the hostess was not allowed to behave like this, and she could not refuse to manage the mansion. Deciding that no one should show her weaknesses, the heroine opened the curtains in Reina's room. After that, turning to the girl, Chimera found her behavior extremely rude. After all, she hadn't even greeted her, and besides, did Reina always receive guests in such a dark room? Looking at the girl who looked like a frightened kitten, the heroine was shocked that she had the courage to desire what belongs to others. Was Reina really so helpless that Chimera was very surprised? At this moment, the girl was already shaking with despair, and she doubted that she was able to endure it. Reina felt her heart break to see this. After all, most of the time, her beloved Bernard spends in the imperial palace. And realizing that everyone else just hated her, the girl didn't know how she could be here alone. Looking at her contemptuously, Chimera didn't understand how Reina could still look down on everyone. She also decided to clarify whether the girl was really brave enough to defend her love for the hero. After all, she herself assured that she was ready for anything, but Reina simply could not do anything about her fear. She knew before that no one liked it here, but she didn't think it was so close to hate. And as much as Reina loved Bernard, she believed that if she continued to go to this house, she would soon die. Prior to that, the heroine believed that the girl was blinded by her greed and did not realize that entering this house was tantamount to death. Right now, Reina wanted nothing more than to hear from Miss Carmilla that she would be all right and that she was brave. If the girl hears these words from the heroine herself, she will certainly be able to overcome herself and boldly go forward. Chimera did not understand why she wanted to hear this from her, because it was really impossible to make a decision on her own. Now, with just one word, the heroine could push Reina into the lion's den, but herself, without knowing why, could not bring herself to do it. Therefore, she just silently turned around and began to leave, confusing the girl. In desperation, she called the heroine a lady again, hearing in response that to her, she was now Miss Chimera. Until she calmed down, the heroine did not want to do anything, because Reina was not even able to get dressed. With that, she left the girl's room, slamming the door behind her. He had to ask a maid or butler to do the rest, because Reina was really hard to look at now. She clung to the man so zealously, not even suspecting that he was her enemy. For this, and not only for this reason, Chimera hated this girl more and more. The heroine was very annoyed by her selfishness, because she even wanted to put all the blame on her. Even so, Reina wasn't the real villain. And in order not to return her past life, Chimera was ready to become a villain, and she did not care, even if no one loved her. Regardless of anything, only Reina was to blame, and the heroine could not do anything about it. Later, they met in the fitting room, where the girl was about to change her simple outfit for a luxurious dress. How she would behave was up to her, but Chimera hoped that during her debut, Reina's eyes would not be swollen. Of course, unless the girl wants to deliberately disgrace the heroine, to which she immediately shook her head. When the maids came up to her to help her change, Chimera suddenly wondered why Reina was so homesick for Bernard. After all, did the hero really not tell her anything about his busyness? Very nervous, the girl decided that this was just his job and Bernard had his influence. Then the heroine decided to find out what Reina and the hero do when they are alone. Taken aback by such a question, the girl turned to Chimera with bewilderment and wariness. At that moment, the maids perked up their ears and Reina admitted that they were just talking or she was singing to his piano playing. Initially, Bernard played the violin well, but due to fencing, his hands became rough and now he no longer plays stringed instruments. Looking at the skeptical expression on Chimera's face, she decided that she had said something trivial. However, the heroine immediately calmed her down, pretending that she wanted to know only out of curiosity. When Reina and Bernard were together, they had fun and she believed that she would be the only one he would love. Looking at her, Chimera concluded that Reina looked very good now. And she also wanted the girl to smile at the banquet in the same way as she did now, when she spoke about Bernard. After all, if the heroine appears with a pale bride, then everyone will consider her the one who humiliates the girl because of what happened. Without even thinking about such a moment, Reina immediately began to ask for forgiveness. But in Chimera's opinion, there was no need to apologize, because does her apology have any value? Finding this funny, the heroine looked at the girl with mockery, after which she approached her. At least in the future, Reina will take responsibility for her facial expressions. In front of her, as her sponsor and in front of her husband, Chimera hoped that the girl would not disgrace herself. Seeing how stunned Reina was by her words, the heroine herself did not experience anything at that moment. She only intended to forget her past life in hell and help the girl take her place. The heroine wondered what Reina was thinking when she put her in this light. In addition, Chimera would be even happier if the girl rebuffed her at least once. In fact, she had terrible feelings when she looked at a person's misfortunes, but in this case, she didn't care. Later, when Max learned that Bernard had decided to marry Reina, he was discouraged. The crown prince immediately realized that the hero was in big trouble, from which it was almost impossible to get out. Then he decided to ask the servant what had happened to Lady Carmela at that time. When Max heard in response that she had become the patroness of Bernard's beloved, he was even more taken aback. Completely confused, he did not understand why Chimera had made such an unexpected decision. The next morning, the heroine was attacked by a strange dream that did not allow her to calm down. Looking around, she stood inside the familiar manor, surrounded by several maids. Suddenly, she heard a voice on the side, which was also familiar to her, and ran there. Someone begged for help, crying and sobbing in complete despair. Stopping in front of the room, Chimera suddenly realized that this was the door to her chambers, in the mansion of Demeter. Realizing that crying and moaning were coming from there, she quietly opened the door, listening warily. At that moment, the girl was sitting on her bed, curled up in a ball and sobbing bitterly. Looking closely, the heroine came to the conclusion that it was herself. At the same time, she had an unbearable desire to hug this girl. Voices began to sound in her head, not understanding how she was able to survive such pain. Deciding that she must have been offended by the whole world, Chimera wrapped the girl in her arms. She was still in pain and it was not in the past, and even the heroine herself turned away from herself. At the thought of this, the girl began to cry even harder, and the moans turned into a scream. But Chimera suddenly decided that everything would be all right now, because she had come here to get her out. At the same moment, her copy smiled, and the heroine felt sincere joy inside. Waking up in tears, she decided that now she had finally said goodbye to her past self, having received incredible lightness inside. On the eve of the banquet, Chimera was in anticipation, because for the first time in a long time she would be able to see familiar faces. Ristel looked into her room, who prepared a bath for her mistress and invited her there. The water temperature turned out to be much better than it was before, for which the heroine praised the servant. Besides, she hoped that Hannah was still able to calm down and finally leave. It was so, and Risdel, on the orders of her mistress, paid her a large sum of money, not understanding why all this was necessary. Then Chimera realized that the maids really hated going to Reina, but in fact, it was worth it. In addition, the heroine wondered if Risdel gave the right perfume to Hannah for Reina. The maid did so, but it confused her. She didn't understand why the mistress would give such a precious perfume to this girl when even cheap ones wouldn't suit her. Before that, Chimera decided that she would give Reina one of her maids for the duration of the banquet. She also hoped that the girl would not refuse something because she considered it an excessive favor. She would be sad if Reina seemed beggar, and besides, it was not a waste of time. In any case, in exchange for this expensive pleasure, she will have to give up everything she has. Considering her mistress too kind, Risdel was very worried about her. Therefore, she decided that at all costs, she would protect the heroine. Falling into a stupor, Chimera did not understand. Was she the one who behaved so cruelly? Was she so kind? Bursting out laughing, she thought it was the funniest thing she had ever heard that day. The heroine did not understand how Rizdel had even thought of such a thing, which made the maid's lips pout. After the bath, she, together with another servant, brought the lady into a suitable appearance for the celebration. They used a glitter made in a special store that included seed oil and flower water. At some point, the pearls were distributed over the heroine's face for an even more magical look. Then, they added rose quartz powder for good luck, and finally applied silver powder mixed with glue. In addition, they used a rose made of real silver, indistinguishable from the real one, as a decoration. The girls never ceased to admire how beautiful their mistress was and how everything suited her. To top it all off, when the work was finished, the heroine appeared before them in her angelic form. Looking at their eyes shining with delight, Chimera was sincerely grateful to the maids for their work. Entering their room, Helen had the impression that the goddess of the moon herself had descended from heaven. Now the woman did not even doubt who exactly would be the star of this banquet. However, the heroine considered her mother also beautiful, with which she also agreed. Going with her in the carriage, Chimera noticed that gradually she began to feel better. Now many things were different, and she had the feeling that she had returned to her former self when she was at the peak of her beauty. But also, the heroine remembered the words of one priest that animals also experience such feelings. Realizing that the pain of others becomes a joy for her, Chimera wondered if nature was too cruel. However, such feelings are experienced by everyone, whether it is a beast or even a god himself. The only thing that saved her was a clear knowledge of how to behave. Arriving at the venue of the event, Chimera was delighted with the beauty and luxury reigning around. Helen had heard that Miss Rust, whose skills were on par with her mother's, was in charge of the decoration and preparation of the banquet. Approaching the front door, the heroine suddenly stopped, feeling a slight anxiety. Seeing such a worried look of her daughter, the woman was confused. But as it turned out, Chimera had been attending such events for a long time, and now it felt like it was the first time. She was looking forward to it, but she was a little nervous because there were many things that would be gossiped about behind her back. Smiling at her, Helen decided that everything would be fine, and she would always be on her daughter's side. Chimera was sincerely grateful to her because thanks to the support of her mother, she completely stopped worrying. Besides, when she thought about Reina proudly entering the banquet with Bernard, she would get a little angry. The heroine was firmly convinced that this man should follow the path of suffering and not the path of blessings. Putting these thoughts aside for the moment, the girl smiled at her mother, and together they entered the banquet hall. Once there, they heard a loud voice announcing the arrival of the Armin family. Chimera immediately paid attention to the girls, who were whispering animatedly about something, looking intently at her. From this, the heroine concluded that if she showed weakness, she would be immediately eaten. Suddenly, Helen saw Mrs. Rust and praised her daughter for the banquet she had arranged. Just thinking that she was a little tired, Chimera suddenly saw Lady Rost, who was happily running towards her with a greeting. As it turned out, the girl often invited the heroine to visit, and every time she was upset when she did not come. Chimera also greeted Diana, and Lady Rust was very surprised that the heroine addressed her by name. In addition, the girl suddenly wondered where Chimera got such a charming decoration in the form of a rose. Ever since Miss Armin had entered the hall, all the ladies had been staring at this delightful piece. Delighted, Chimera realized that all this time no one was gossiping about her, but just admiring her. Diana wanted the heroine to go to the others as soon as possible because Lady Hyde was already waiting for them. Helen and Mrs. Rust supported the girl, believing that young people should have fun with young people. Feeling as if wings had grown behind her, Chimera immediately agreed. The heroine also wanted to know if Lady Rust wanted her to show her the debutante. Realizing that it was about Mr. Bernard's beloved, Diana did not understand whether he really loved her. According to the lady, the hero was very cruel to Chimera and brazenly used her kindness, making her the guardian of his bride. From these words, Chimera understood how others see this situation and that they console her, considering it a misunderstanding. Seeing this with her own eyes made her happier, even though she knew she was being frivolous. And yet the heroine did not want Diana to be prejudiced against this young lady. Now, Chimera felt nothing for Bernard, and only simple respect remained. Still indignant at Reina, Lady Rust decided that if Miss Armin thought so, then there was no need to worry. Meanwhile, the heir to the throne of the empire also came to this celebration. Finding himself in front of the building, he silently stared at the light from the windows for a while, wanting to figure everything out as soon as possible. At this time, Kamira was looking around in the banquet hall, looking for the heroes of this celebration. Finally, her eyes fell on Bernard and Reina, who had just arrived, who were quietly standing aside. Approaching them, she greeted each of the characters with a smile. Looking at Reina, the heroine was amazed at the beauty of the necklace, which suited the girl so well. In addition, Kamira was sure that everyone else felt the same way, for which Reina was grateful from the bottom of her heart. Delighted with the words of the heroine, the girl was also delighted with this product. Turning to Kamira, Bernard was sincerely grateful to her for taking care of the rain. At this point, the heroine was very annoyed by his words, but it was not enough to spoil her mood. So she just decided to ask if she could borrow a girl from him to introduce her to other young ladies. Surprised by this, the hero decided that if Reina did not want this, then she could not go. However, the girl immediately gathered her courage, wanting to meet new people and return to her beloved as soon as possible. Smiling, Bernard decided that if it was really her wish, then he was willing to wait a little. At this moment, after going to the lady, Kamira hurried Reina, after which the girl immediately ran after her. Following her, Reina was all glowing with joy and decided to express her sincere gratitude to the heroine. After all, she herself knew that Miss Kamira was not to her liking, but she was still very kind to her. Looking at her coldly, the heroine realized that the girl simply did not fully realize that she was not really kind. All this happened because Kamira knew what price Reina would pay, and she did not need to get her hands dirty. Hearing that sooner or later she would understand everything, the girl shuddered from a surging feeling of anxiety. But finding the strength to smile, she decided that she would still be grateful no matter what Miss Kamira said. Grinning in response, the heroine thought that how grateful she was would be known later. Meanwhile, 4 high-ranking ladies, including Lady Rost, were chatting nicely at a table. Approaching them, Kamira remembered that a very long time had passed since their last meeting. Greeting the ladies, the heroine was very happy to see them again, and at this time, Reina was standing behind her. Diana Rast, who was considered the rose of high society, was delighted with the appearance of Kamira. Belladonna Lodge, the Baroness and the person in charge of the top of the trade, did not understand how she could forget about them. Countess Haida Solar, who had been the Empress's best friend, decided that she had just had a hard time lately. Hearing this, Belladonna took her words back, deciding that she was just glad to see the heroine. At that moment, Hesiona Ia, the daughter of the Viscount and the sister of the war hero, decided to give way to her. After finishing greeting their friend, the ladies fixed their eyes on the girl standing behind her. Haida wondered who it was who had come to them, but Kamira knew that she could not have been unaware of it. However, Lady Solar was just having fun because if a stranger is silent and is nothing, you need to give him a warning. Usually this is done so that this person does not do anything. Seeing that Reina was silent, the heroine decided to introduce her herself as a member of the family from a side branch. She had nothing to do with Kamira's family and was adopted as the adopted daughter of a distant relative. After that, Reina found the strength to introduce herself to the girls, telling them her name. Belladonna looked at her thoughtfully, finding it interesting, and Hesiona only sighed heavily. Diana, in turn, was surprised to see the one she had heard so much about lately. Turning to her, the heroine decided to introduce the ladies sitting there to Reina. The beautiful and young lady Diana Rust came from an ancient, early family and was very well versed in gossip. Apart from her lineage, she was a very sweet and wonderful person, which even embarrassed Diana a little. As for Miss Haida Solar, if Reina wants to be invited to the Imperial Palace, you need to befriend her. Kamira knew that the Empress loved Haida very much, and she was the most prized treasure of the Solar family. Shifting her gaze, the heroine pointed to the mysterious and elegant Lady Belladonna Lodge, who could get everything she wanted. Being in charge of the top of the trade, she could easily get even the precious pearl of the East. And finally, Hesiona Ea, the mistress of this estate, which was given to her personally by His Majesty the Emperor. In addition, the lady's brother was a famous war hero who became famous all over the world. Looking at Reina again, Kamira saw that the girl was looking at the floor in confusion. If she wanted to get closer to the imperial family, then she had to get closer to these ladies. Realizing this, the heroine also knew that for Reina it would not be free at all. Finally smiling, the girl introduced herself again, calling herself Bernard's fiancée. Then Haida suddenly thought that she was the very reason why Miss Chimera's engagement had broken off. Even a fool realizes that if you try to get close to them without having anything behind you, you can face abuse. Therefore now, while Reina fell into a stupor from Lady Solar's words, Haida herself found this topic very interesting. However, although she was an adopted daughter, the Countess decided that it was wrong to call both girls by the surname Armen. Therefore, addressing the girl as a commoner, by name, she wondered if what she said was true. Looking away, Reina pretended to know little about it. Looking at her intently, Chimera suddenly saw how the girl's body began to shake. Realizing that it was necessary to take a step towards her, the heroine decided that it was a completely different story. At the time when this happened, Reina was not yet a member of the Armen family. Therefore, she does not know what they are talking about now, and besides, Chimera became her guardian, which means that everything was in order. Then Haida recalled the rumor that the heroine could not engage in social activities due to illness. Diana considered her an angel who cares about others, and she hoped that everything was fine with the heroine. Looking at Reina with a smile, Lady Solar decided that in this case, she should prepare for a wedding with her stolen fiancé. In her heart, Chimera agreed with her, but her mind demanded that she stand up for the girl, since she was her guardian. But suddenly Reina screamed sharply, deciding that she had never stolen another man. Though her origins were humble, she had never stooped to such a thing. Besides, Bernard wasn't something to take or take away, but he had given up a lot to be with her. Therefore, Reina wanted the ladies to stop offending the hero's choice. After that, the atmosphere changed dramatically, and the tension in the air squeezed from all sides. With a worried sigh, Chimera knew that Haida would definitely not tolerate such a thing. All the ladies also looked at the Countess with concern, who was about to explode at this moment. Looking menacingly at Reina, Haida found her words incredibly bold. Just looking at this lady sent shivers down the girl's spine. The Countess grinned and decided that perhaps Reina thought she was doing Bernard a disservice. And is it only because she fell in love with him first that she decided that she could get a hero? As she approached Reina, Haida wondered if she had ever had the feeling that this man would belong to her. Livestock do not marry humans, so why do livestock enjoy what only humans are allowed to do? Or does the girl have no brains at all, since she herself has just spoken about him as if she were talking about a thing? From all this, Lady Solar deduced that Reina was not someone he could marry. For even after this little pressure, she could not utter a word, probably because cattle do not know how to talk. Deciding that it was time to stop this, Chimera wished that Haida would shut up immediately. Shocked by what she heard, Lady Solar decided that it was because of Reina. The heroine was talking to her like that. The Countess also thought that if Chimera did not agree with her words about the girl, then she would be disappointed in her. Haida was the only daughter of the Solar family and a famous lady in social circles, known for her cruel and unruly nature. At the same time, because of the favor of the Empress, no one could even touch her, and moreover, no one could stop her. However, Chimera could do it, and approaching the enraged lady, she put her palm on her cheek. After squeezing her a little, the heroine decided that of course she did not mean at all that she did not agree with her words. The raging bull's eyes in the lady's eyes gradually began to become calmer. Haida immediately remembered her childhood and her best friend, who was now standing in front of her. Changing her anger to mercy, she decided that if Chimera was saying this, then so be it. However, she still did not like this girl, and the heroine could not even count on Lady Solar to treat her well. Hearing Chimera's words of gratitude in response, Haida was completely confused. Now that the matter had been settled, the heroine apologized and decided to step aside for a moment. At that moment, Reina heard her whisper that she also needed to go to rest for a while. A minute later, they were alone in a closed room, and the girl immediately sat down on the table, near the bed. Chimera wanted Reina to rest here and return when she came to her senses. Suddenly, the girl decided that Miss Chimera should be happy because she was born a man and not a cattle. In Reina's opinion, it would be great if they just switched places. Clutching her head with her hands, the girl thought that everything was predetermined with her birth because her mother was taken away and she had to grow up on porridge. Stopping in front of the door, the heroine did not understand why she was saying this. As it turned out, her mother was the only thing she had, but even she put her brother first. However, after that, her mother was killed by the master, and when Chimera heard about it, she was horrified. As it turned out, the woman simply drank the poison instead of him and fell dead on the floor, and they left her there to die. Reina hated everyone, including her mother and those who killed her, but dead people don't come back. But then, unexpectedly, that master appeared on the threshold of their house again. He decided that he would take the place of his deceased mother and become a new world for the girl. In Reina's opinion, it didn't make sense because anyway, her mother died because of him. But he kept coming and talking to the girl, so she stopped wanting to die and started living again. However, in the end, after being rejected by him again, Reina decided that the reason was that she was cattle, not a human. And would she have to wait every day for her to be picked up? The heroine could not even imagine how much she was bored, and the girl wanted help from her. She believed that Chimera would be able to explain to her how she could become human. Then the heroine wondered, what if nothing works out and Bernard marries a noblewoman, and not her? Would she wait for him as she had waited for her dead mother? Besides, wouldn't she feel sorry for the noble lady the hero would marry? Turning away, Reina admitted that she was jealous of the heroine, who was born an aristocrat and believed that her fiancé was being taken away from her. Therefore, to be honest, she did not feel guilt or regret. At the same moment, Chimera turned around sharply and headed for the exit, bringing the girl to a stupor. Perhaps the heroine would prefer to tell her about her thoughts, and thus give her some food to think about. But now, Chimera wasn't strong enough to say such a thing. And although it is possible in the future, she will do it, but the heroine will never be able to forgive this girl. Slowly descending the stairs into the hall, Chimera no longer wanted to see Reina or Bernard. With each step, the heroine's head began to spin more, and she thought that perhaps it was worth going home. She didn't understand why she was so eager to hear an apology that she would never be able to receive. Suddenly, someone passing by accidentally hit Chimera, causing her to fall to the floor. Deciding that she urgently needed to get up, the heroine suddenly felt herself crying. At this moment, another man leaned over her, wanting to know if the lady was okay. Everything was fine, but Chimera couldn't understand why she was crying. She had known for a long time that she would never get that apology, and in any case, it was a stupid way to vent her anger. Had she made a mistake when she had just fallen in love with Bernard? Is it her fault, and did this mistake really cost the heroine so much? The young man suddenly expressed a desire to help the fallen lady. But Chimera immediately began to get back on her feet, believing that she could cope on her own. However, as soon as she got up, everything around began to spin, and the ground began to give way from under her feet. Having supported her and not allowed her to fall again, the hero decided that her actions made him feel uncomfortable. He hoped that the girl would allow him to help, and having surrendered, the heroine agreed. She walked to the sofa, leaning on the stranger, who suddenly decided that she smelled very pleasant, the smell of wet grass at night. At the same time, he decided to ask her what exactly the perfume was called. The answer to this question could be considered a payment for help. Besides, the hero wanted to give them to his sister. As it turned out, it was a spikenard balm. However, its aroma mixes with the aroma of the body, so it is difficult to repeat the smell exactly. Smiling at the girl, the man was also delighted with the lovely silver rose on her clothes. But he immediately learned that it was just a paint made by melting silver and applying it to a fresh rose, so it wasn't particularly valuable. And in general, the hero did not need to worry so much about this. Seeing a smile on the heroine's face, the man was glad that she finally stopped crying. Stupefied by his words, Chimera was very embarrassed, turning away. Reaching the sofa, the stranger decided that the girl should have a good rest before leaving. After planting her, he decided to bring something, which puzzled Chimera a little. Waiting for him, the heroine realized how ashamed she was that she burst into tears in front of him. Suddenly, the stranger reappeared, bringing her a wet bandage and offering to put it on her eyes. Chimera was grateful for his care, deciding that due to her carelessness, she created problems for the hero. It was okay if he left now, because she was going to sit here for a while and then go to her friends. Putting a blindfold and then hearing the man sit down next to her, the heroine was confused. However, the stranger could not leave her with her eyes closed, alone in such a place, so he decided to sit with her. But if it was uncomfortable for her, then he was ready to invite the girl's friends here. Chimera immediately refused, not wanting them to see her like this. The hero believed that there was nothing wrong with relying on others. After all, if she does not ask for help, even if she keeps it to herself for a long time, then is it not a waste of time, creating a strong bond? The heroine grinned, thinking that, according to him, you need to invest in advance in order to use it later in trouble. But whatever it was, the stranger's voice was pleasant, and she wondered if he was trying to console her. Perhaps this is due to the fact that she did not show herself in the best shape, but still, Chimera was more comfortable with him than with her loved ones. The hero decided that friends are not always good, and would a girl wear good clothes to go to a bad place? To this, Chimera calmly noted that she knows how to share joy, but unfortunately, not sadness. The heroine believed that it would be better this way, because would she be able to get help if she was weak? The hero knew that it would hurt her if she trusted someone too much, but not trusting would also hurt. However, you need to find a middle ground by becoming gullible and less trusting so as not to torture yourself. However, it is extremely difficult for any person to find this middle, so everyone experiences pain in one way or another. Realizing that she was in incredible pain, Chimera was already tired of stepping on the same rake. Starting to cry again, she thanked the stranger for his words. He, in turn, decided that sometimes it was not bad to cry, especially in front of people she would never see again. In the girl's place, the hero would cry as much as he wanted, because in the end, he would not lose anything. Chimera agreed with him, however. She could not imagine this man crying in front of a stranger. But now, the atmosphere was too relaxing for her to restrain herself, so tears hailed from Chimera's eyes. At this moment, Crown Prince Max sat next to her and kindly supported her.